In the quiet suburbs of Springfield, Missouri, a Facebook post sent shockwaves through the community. "That bitch is dead." The chilling message appeared on Dee Dee Blanchard's account, leaving friends and neighbors in a state of panic. Concern quickly turned to horror as police discovered a grisly scene inside the pink bungalow on Volunteer Way. Dee Dee Blanchard, a devoted mother to her chronically ill daughter, lay face down in a pool of blood, stabbed to death in her own bed. But where was Gypsy Rose, her wheelchair-bound daughter who suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and a host of other ailments? As investigators peeled back the layers of the shocking crime, they uncovered a truth stranger than fiction. The case of Dee Dee Blanchard's murder would captivate the nation, exposing a web of lies, abuse, and a desperate bid for freedom that would challenge our understanding of victimhood and justice. Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard seemed to embody the purest form of maternal devotion. Everywhere they went, people marveled at the bond between the selfless mother and her frail, childlike daughter. Gypsy Rose, with her wide eyes and high-pitched voice, appeared trapped in the body of a perpetual child, plagued by a laundry list of medical conditions. Confined to a wheelchair and dependent on a feeding tube, she relied entirely on her mother's constant care. Dee Dee dedicated her life to Gypsy's well-being, navigating a maze of doctor's appointments, medications, and treatments. The pair became local celebrities, recipients of charitable donations, trips to Disney World, and even a house built by Habitat for Humanity. Their story of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds touched hearts across the country. But beneath this inspiring facade lurked a sinister reality, one that would ultimately lead to a night of violence and a revelation that would stun the world. On that fateful June morning in 2015, police officers approached the Blanchard home with trepidation. The ominous Facebook post and concerned calls from friends had set alarm bells ringing. As they entered the pink house, a gift from Habitat for Humanity, an eerie silence enveloped them. The living room, cluttered with medical equipment and childish decorations, showed no signs of struggle. But as they moved deeper into the house, a horrifying scene unfolded. In the master bedroom, Dee Dee Blanchard's body lay face down on the bed, blood-stained sheets tangled around her. Multiple stab wounds marred her back, a testament to the fury of the attack. Investigators noted the absence of forced entry, suggesting Dee Dee likely knew her killer. Most alarmingly, Gypsy Rose was nowhere to be found. Her wheelchair sat empty, her medications untouched. Had the sickly girl been kidnapped, or had something far more sinister occurred? As crime scene technicians meticulously collected evidence, detectives grappled with a chilling question: what dark secrets lay hidden behind the closed doors of this seemingly ordinary home? As news of Dee Dee's murder and Gypsy's disappearance spread, a frantic search began. Authorities feared for the safety of the vulnerable young woman, supposedly unable to care for herself. But the investigation took a surprising turn when cybercrime experts traced the origin of the disturbing Facebook post. The message had not come from the Blanchard home in Missouri, but from over 500 miles away in Big Bend, Wisconsin. Surveillance footage from a local Walmart showed an astonishing sight: Gypsy Rose, walking unassisted, her head shaved, accompanied by a young man. The girl who had spent her life in a wheelchair was now moving freely, her supposed disabilities seemingly vanished. As police closed in on the location, they discovered Gypsy hiding in a closet, physically healthy and mentally alert. The young man with her was identified as Godejohn, an online boyfriend Gypsy had kept secret from her mother. With each revelation, investigators realized they were unraveling a mystery far more complex and disturbing than they had initially imagined. As Gypsy Rose sat in the interrogation room, the full extent of the deception began to emerge. The sickly child the world had come to know was a carefully crafted illusion. Gypsy had never suffered from muscular dystrophy, leukemia, or any of the myriad conditions her mother had claimed. Her hair, shaved to mimic the effects of chemotherapy, had grown back healthy and strong. The feeding tube, a constant presence throughout her life, had been entirely unnecessary. Medical records revealed a history of fabricated illnesses and unnecessary surgeries, all orchestrated by Dee Dee. Gypsy, it turned out, had been a prisoner in her own body, forced to play the role of an eternally ill child. The truth shattered the image of the devoted mother and sparked outrage and disbelief. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a sinister pattern of abuse and control that had shaped every aspect of Gypsy's life. the murder that had shocked the community now took on a new dimension, raising difficult questions about victimhood, survival, and the lengths one might go to escape a lifetime of abuse. Dee Dee Blanchard's deception extended far beyond the walls of their pink bungalow. For years, she had woven an intricate tapestry of lies, manipulating doctors, charities, and even her own family. Experts would later identify her behavior as a severe case of Munchausen Syndrome by proxy, a rare form of abuse where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in a person under their care. Dee Dee's fraud began when Gypsy was an infant, subjecting her daughter to unnecessary medical procedures and medications. She isolated Gypsy from the outside world, controlling every aspect of her life. The pair moved frequently, leaving behind a trail of suspicious doctors and unanswered questions. Dee Dee expertly played the role of the beleaguered but devoted mother, garnering sympathy and financial support from all who encountered them. She collected disability payments, accepted donations, and reveled in the attention her daughter's supposed illnesses brought. As the truth came to light, those who had known the Blanchards struggled to reconcile the caring mother they thought they knew with the manipulative abuser she truly was. In the depths of her isolated existence, Gypsy Rose found an unexpected lifeline in the digital world. Through a Christian dating website, she connected with Nicholas Godejohn, a young man from Wisconsin who would become both her confidant and co-conspirator. Their online relationship blossomed in secret, hidden from Dee Dee's watchful eye. For Gypsy, Nicholas represented freedom, love, and a chance at a normal life, all things she had been denied for so long. As their bond deepened, Gypsy began to share the dark reality of her life with Nicholas. She revealed the years of abuse, the unnecessary medical procedures, and the suffocating control her mother exerted over every aspect of her existence. Nicholas, driven by a misguided sense of heroism and his own complex psychological issues, agreed to help Gypsy escape her torment. Together, they formulated a plan that would shock the nation. On a warm June night in 2015, Nicholas traveled to Springfield, entering the Blanchard home while Dee Dee slept. Armed with a knife given to him by Gypsy, he made his way to Dee Dee's bedroom. Gypsy, hiding in the bathroom, covered her ears as Nicholas carried out the gruesome act they had planned. In the aftermath, the couple fled to Wisconsin, leaving behind a crime scene that would baffle investigators and a community in shock. Their deadly plan, born from years of abuse and desperation, set in motion a chain of events that would challenge society's perceptions of victimhood and justice. As detectives delved deeper into the Blanchard case, they found themselves navigating a labyrinth of lies and manipulation. The interrogation of Gypsy Rose and Nicholas Godejohn revealed a story so bizarre it seemed almost unbelievable. Gypsy, finally free from her mother's influence, began to unravel the tapestry of deception that had defined her life. She spoke of years of psychological and physical abuse, of being forced to act younger than her age, and of the constant fear of disappointing her mother. Nicholas, for his part, confessed to the murder but claimed he had done it out of love for Gypsy and a desire to rescue her from her abusive situation. As investigators pieced together the timeline of events, they were struck by the meticulous planning that had gone into the crime. Evidence collected from the Blanchard home painted a picture of a household steeped in falsehoods. Medical equipment for non-existent conditions sat alongside drawers full of medication Gypsy never needed. Perhaps most damning were the records of doctors' visits and hospital stays, each one a carefully orchestrated performance by Dee Dee to maintain her elaborate hoax. The detectives also uncovered a trail of financial fraud, with Dee Dee having bilked charities, Medicaid, and kind-hearted individuals out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. As the true nature of Gypsy's upbringing came to light, the investigators found themselves grappling with a difficult question. In a case where the victim of a murder had subjected her daughter to a lifetime of abuse, who was the real victim? The Blanchard case presented a unique challenge for medical professionals and mental health experts. As they pored over Gypsy's extensive medical history, a disturbing pattern emerged. Years of unnecessary treatments, surgeries, and medications had taken a toll on Gypsy's body, despite her lack of genuine ailments. Pediatricians who reviewed the case were astounded by Dee Dee's ability to convince so many medical professionals of Gypsy's non-existent conditions. They pointed to the fragmented healthcare system and Dee Dee's frequent moves as factors that allowed her deception to continue for so long. psychologists delved into the complex dynamics of Munchausen Syndrome by proxy, explaining how Dee Dee's own mental illness had driven her to subject her daughter to years of medical abuse. They described it as a severe form of child abuse, where the perpetrator derives satisfaction and attention from the perceived illness of their victim. The experts also examined the psychological impact on Gypsy, noting the severe developmental delays and emotional trauma resulting from years of isolation and manipulation. They highlighted the difficulty Gypsy would face in adjusting to normal life after being infantilized for so long. As medical professionals grappled with the ethical implications of the case, many called for increased awareness and better safeguards to prevent similar situations in the future. The Blanchard case became a stark reminder of the potential for abuse within the medical system and the devastating consequences when such abuse goes unchecked. The wheels of justice began to turn as prosecutors prepared to bring the Blanchard case to trial. The legal complexities were unprecedented, with the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred beyond recognition. Gypsy Rose Blanchard faced charges of second-degree murder for a role in planning her mother's death. Her attorneys, however, painted a picture of a young woman who had endured a lifetime of abuse and saw no other way out. They argued that Gypsy's actions were a desperate bid for freedom after years of medical child abuse. The prosecution, while acknowledging the abuse Gypsy had suffered, maintained that murder was not a justifiable response. As news of the case spread, public opinion was sharply divided. Many saw Gypsy as a victim who had finally fought back against her abuser, while others struggled to reconcile her role in planning a brutal murder. The media frenzy surrounding the case added another layer of complexity, with documentaries, news specials, and true crime podcasts dissecting every detail of the Blanchard saga. Godejohn's case presented its own challenges. His attorneys planned to argue that his autism spectrum disorder and other mental health issues had made him particularly susceptible to Gypsy's influence. The prosecution, however, pointed to the premeditated nature of the crime and Godejohn's understanding of its consequences. As both cases moved towards trial, legal experts debated the potential outcomes and the broader implications for cases involving long-term abuse and coercive control. The courtroom became the stage for the final act of the Blanchard tragedy as Gypsy Rose and Godejohn faced justice. Gypsy's trial, eagerly anticipated by a public captivated by her story, took an unexpected turn when she accepted a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder, she received a sentence of 10 years in prison. The relatively lenient sentence reflected the extraordinary circumstances of her case and the years of abuse she had endured. As Gypsy addressed the court, her voice no longer childlike but strong and clear, she expressed remorse for her mother's death while also speaking of the freedom she had found, even behind bars. Godejohn's trial, by contrast, went forward in full. The courtroom heard testimony detailing the online relationship between Godejohn and Gypsy, the planning of the murder, and the brutal act itself. Experts debated Godejohn's mental state and his capacity to understand the gravity of his actions. In emotional testimony, Gypsy took the stand, describing the abuse she had suffered and her desperation to escape. Despite attempts by the defense to portray Godejohn as a love-struck young man manipulated by Gypsy, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the gavel fell on the final verdict, it marked the end of a legal process that had forced the justice system to grapple with complex questions of abuse, coercion, and culpability. In the wake of the trials, the Blanchard case continued to reverberate through the lives of those involved and society at large. Gypsy Rose Blanchard, now serving her sentence, began the long process of adapting to a life free from her mother's control. Behind bars, she received education and therapy, slowly learning to navigate the world as an independent adult. Her story became a cautionary tale, prompting discussions about medical child abuse and the importance of believing children who report mistreatment. The case had far-reaching implications for the medical community, leading to calls for better communication between healthcare providers and more robust systems to detect potential abuse. Child protective services across the country reviewed their protocols, seeking ways to identify and intervene in cases of medical child abuse earlier. The Blanchard saga also sparked a broader societal reflection on the nature of victimhood and the complexities of abuse. It challenged simplistic notions of good and evil, forcing people to confront the uncomfortable reality that victims can sometimes become perpetrators. True crime enthusiasts and armchair detectives continued to dissect every aspect of the case, ensuring that the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard would not be forgotten. As the years passed, the Pink House on Volunteer Way stood as a silent reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls, a monument to the devastating consequences of lies, abuse, and a desperate bid for freedom. The murder of Dee Dee Blanchard and the subsequent unraveling of her web of lies left an indelible mark on all who encountered the story. It serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human deception and the devastating impact of long-term abuse. The case challenged our understanding of victimhood, blurring the lines between abuser and abused in ways that continue to provoke debate and soul-searching. As we reflect on the twists and turns of this extraordinary case, we are left with more questions than answers. How could such elaborate deception go undetected for so long? What drives a mother to subject her child to years of unnecessary medical procedures? And how do we, as a society, protect the vulnerable from those who should be their fiercest protectors? The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the human capacity for both cruelty and survival. It reminds us that behind closed doors, in homes that seem ordinary from the outside, unspeakable dramas can unfold. As Gypsy continues to serve her sentence, her future remains uncertain. Will she be able to build a life for herself after years of isolation and manipulation? Can she ever truly escape the shadow of her mother's abuse? The Blanchard case will likely be studied, debated, and remembered for years to come, a testament to its power to shock, to move, and to make us question our assumptions about family, trust, and the very nature of truth itself.
Before Tammy King's tragic death, a disturbing pattern of events unfolded. This video reconstructs that chilling timeline, revealing every alarming incident and overlooked detail. Prepare to see the escalating threats and insidious forces that led to her demise. For most people who knew her, Tammy King's life appeared steady, predictable, and deeply rooted in routine. She was someone whose presence blended naturally into her community, familiar rather than loud, dependable rather than dramatic. Tammy wasn't known for drawing attention to herself. She lived a life that, on the surface, followed a rhythm many would describe as normal. Her days were structured. Mornings began early. Responsibilities were met without complaint. Whether through work, family obligations, or casual interactions around town, Tammy occupied her place quietly, without leaving ripples behind her. She was recognized not for controversy, but for consistency. To neighbors and acquaintances, there was nothing unusual about her habits, her movements, or her demeanor. And that is precisely what makes the events that followed so unsettling. In the weeks leading up to her death, nothing overtly alarming was reported. There were no public confrontations, no dramatic changes that demanded attention. Life moved forward in the same unremarkable way it always had. Tammy continued her routine. The world around her continued turning. From the outside, there was no clear sign that anything was wrong. But in true crime, the most important details are often the quietest ones. Subtle changes began to emerge, not dramatic enough to trigger alarm, but noticeable in hindsight. Small deviations from routine, moments that felt slightly off, yet easily dismissed at the time. A shift in behavior that didn't register as dangerous, only different. These were the kinds of details people rarely record in memory until they are forced to look backward. There were unexplained occurrences, minor disruptions that, standing alone, meant very little. A conversation that ended too abruptly, a sense of unease that couldn't be articulated, a pattern that didn't yet resemble one. Each moment slipped past without resistance, blending into the background of daily life. No one sounded an alarm, because there was no clear reason to do so. This is how many tragedies begin, not with chaos but with silence. As days passed, the underlying tension grew quietly, not in a way that announced itself, but in a way that waited. Tammy did not publicly express fear. There was no dramatic plea for help. If concern existed, it stayed contained, hidden beneath routine interactions and everyday obligations. To those around her, Tammy was still Tammy. What makes the period before her death so disturbing is not what was seen, But what wasn't? The absence of visible warning signs created a false sense of safety. The belief that nothing was wrong allowed small details to be overlooked, ignored, or forgotten altogether. And yet, when the timeline is reconstructed carefully, those overlooked moments begin to form a pattern. This is where the story truly begins. Because the hours, days, and decisions leading up to Tammy King's death did not unfold randomly. Each moment built quietly upon the last. Each unexplained occurrence added weight. Each subtle shift moved events forward, unnoticed at the time, but impossible to ignore once the outcome became known. The purpose of this timeline is not to dramatize what happened, but to understand it. By examining each step in sequence, the ordinary transforms into something far more troubling. What once seemed insignificant becomes essential. What was dismissed becomes revealing. And what felt normal begins to feel anything but. Before the storm arrived, there was only quiet. And in that quiet, the warning signs were already there, waiting to be seen. The first incidents did not arrive with force. They appeared quietly, scattered across time, easy to dismiss and difficult to connect. At first, there was nothing that clearly signaled danger, only interruptions. Minor disturbances that felt inconvenient rather than threatening. It began with anonymous calls. They were brief, untraceable, often disconnected before anything meaningful was said. Sometimes there was silence on the line. Other times, a pause that lingered just long enough to feel deliberate. There was no voice demanding attention, no message left behind, no direct threat to respond to, just the sound of someone present and then gone. Tammy mentioned the calls casually without urgency. Annoying perhaps, but not alarming. Unknown numbers were easy to ignore. Robocalls were common. There was no reason at that stage to assign intent. Then came the packages. They arrived without explanation. No return address, no note inside. Ordinary items, nothing immediately dangerous or illegal, yet unnecessary and confusing. Gifts without context, objects without meaning. Each delivery raised the same cue. You question who sent this and why. But none provided an answer. Again, the instinct was dismissal. People receive mail meant for others. Shipping mistakes happen. The absence of a clear message made the packages feel pointless rather than sinister. Individually, they seemed harmless. There was nothing concrete to report, nothing that justified concern. The third disruption came in the form of minor vandalism. Nothing dramatic, no broken windows, no forced entry, just small signs that something had been disturbed. A knocked-over object, a mark where none had been before. Damage so limited it could be blamed on accident, weather, or coincidence. Still, the unease began to settle. Tammy's reaction mirrored that of many people confronted with unclear threats. She questioned herself first. Was this really happening? Was it worth mentioning? Without a pattern, each incident stood alone, isolated, easy to rationalize away. Loved ones responded the same way. Confusion replaced fear. Concern was present but muted. They discussed possibilities that made the situation feel manageable. Pranks, mistakes, bad luck. The absence of a visible suspect made the incidents feel abstract, almost unreal. There was no one to blame, no face to associate with the disruptions, no confrontation to escalate the situation into something undeniable. And that uncertainty worked against action. Without a clear pattern, nothing connected the calls to the packages. Nothing linked the packages to the vandalism. Each event existed in its own small space, demanding little attention on its own. Together, they might have suggested escalation, but hindsight had not yet arrived. This is how warning signs are often missed. Threats are rarely obvious in the beginning. They don't announce themselves. They arrive disguised as inconveniences, as background noise, as moments that feel too small to matter. The lack of clarity creates hesitation, and hesitation creates silence. Tammy continued her routine. She went to work. She kept appointments. She spoke to friends and family as she always had. Life, outwardly, remained intact. Whatever was happening had not yet disrupted her ability to function, only her sense of comfort. And that discomfort was difficult to explain. There were no suspects to question, no evidence to collect, no moment dramatic enough to demand intervention. The incidents existed in a gray space, unsettling but incomplete, easy to overlook, easy to forget. But they were not random. At the time, they felt disconnected. Later, they would be seen as the first cracks, the early signals of something steadily unfolding beneath the surface. What made them dangerous was not their intensity, it was their subtlety. Over time, what once felt scattered began to tighten into something far more deliberate. The incidents that had seemed isolated no longer stood alone. They repeated, they escalated, and most importantly, they began to follow Tammy King. The anonymous calls returned, more frequent now. No longer separated by days or weeks, they came in clusters, sometimes at predictable times. The silence on the line grew heavier, more intentional. It was no longer easy to dismiss them as coincidence. Someone, somewhere, was choosing when to reach out and choosing not to speak. The packages followed the same trajectory. Deliveries arrived closer together. The items inside shifted from meaningless to unsettling, still not overtly threatening but increasingly personal. Objects that suggested familiarity, knowledge, presence. Whoever was responsible didn't just know where Tammy lived, they knew enough to unsettle her without revealing themselves. Then came the moments that could no longer be explained away. Tammy began noticing the same vehicles in places they didn't belong, parked nearby, passing more than once, appearing and disappearing without explanation. At first, she questioned her own perception. Familiar streets invite familiar sights. It was possible she was imagining connections that weren't there, but the feeling persisted. What once felt like background noise now felt like observation. The vandalism escalated as well. Still restrained, still careful, but unmistakably intentional. Items moved rather than broken. Spaces disturbed rather than destroyed. The message was subtle but clear. Someone had access. Someone was close. This was the point where unease turned into fear. Tammy began confiding in people she trusted. Conversations that had once been casual took on a different weight. She described what was happening, struggling to make it sound serious without exaggerating. The challenge was always the same. How do you explain danger when nothing has crossed a legal line? She reached out for help. Reports were made. Concerns were voiced. The response, however, was restrained. Without direct threats, without a visible suspect, there was little that could be done immediately. Authorities require patterns, evidence, escalation that can be clearly documented. And Tammy's situation existed in what was happening felt personal, but it was difficult to prove intent. Each event could still be interpreted in isolation. Calls without messages, packages without threats, sightings without confirmation. The absence of a clear crime left little room for action. To those around her, the situation felt troubling but unresolved. Friends offered reassurance, encouragement to stay alert, suggestions that aimed to restore a sense of control. But even among those closest to her, there was uncertainty. No one could identify who was responsible or why, and that uncertainty bred delay. In hindsight, certain details stand out. Details that seemed insignificant at the time. Patterns that only became clear once viewed as a whole. Repetition where coincidence had once been assumed. Behavior that suggested escalation rather than randomness. But at the moment they occurred, those details were easy to misinterpret. Fear doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits for permission to be believed. Tammy continued to live her life cautiously, aware now that something was wrong but unsure how to confront it. She adjusted habits, paid closer attention, took steps that felt protective, even if they weren't officially acknowledged as necessary. The system designed to intervene relies on clarity, and clarity was still just out of reach. By the time the pattern became undeniable, the damage had already begun. What started as discomfort had transformed into threat. What had once been ignored now demanded attention. But time had been lost. The alarms were ringing. They just weren't loud enough to stop what came next. In the days immediately preceding Tammy King's death, the atmosphere around her shifted again, this time unmistakably. What had once been ambiguous now felt urgent. The restraint that defined earlier incidents began to erode, replaced by a growing sense that time was running out. The contact intensified. The calls became more frequent, closer together, harder to ignore. There was no longer space between them long enough to regain calm. Each ring carried expectation. Each unanswered call lingered in the mind long after the phone went silent. Even without words, the message was clear. The presence was no longer distant. The threats, while still carefully measured, grew more direct. The line between suggestion and intimidation blurred. What had once felt abstract now felt personal, targeted, deliberate. Tammy no longer questioned whether these events were connected, only how far they would go. The uncertainty that once muted her fear now amplified it. Alongside the calls came moments that removed any remaining sense of safety. Sightings became harder to dismiss. Familiar places no longer felt neutral. Routes that once brought comfort now carried tension. Tammy began to feel watched not just in passing but persistently. The feeling followed her into her home, into her routines, into moments that were once private. This was no longer about disruption. It was about control. Those close to Tammy noticed the change. Her demeanor shifted subtly but consistently. She became more guarded, less at ease. Conversations carried weight where there had once been ease. She spoke carefully, choosing words that reflected fear without fully naming it. There were warnings, moments that, in hindsight, demanded more attention than they received. Comments that hinted at exhaustion. Statements that suggested she felt trapped. Expressions of concern that didn't sound like panic but didn't sound like nothing either. Were not cries for help in the traditional sense. They were quieter, more measured, and easier to underestimate. The challenge was timing. Everything escalated quickly, but not quickly enough to trigger immediate intervention. There was still no clear suspect, no explicit threat that crossed a legal threshold, no moment dramatic enough to force decisive action. Each warning existed in a narrow window, serious but not provable, and that narrow space proved dangerous. The psychological toll began to surface more visibly. Tammy's sleep suffered. Her sense of control weakened. The effort required to maintain normalcy grew heavier by the day. She lived in a state of anticipation, waiting for something she could not predict but felt certain was approaching. This kind of pressure reshapes the mind. Fear becomes constant rather than reactive. Decisions are made defensively. Trust erodes not just in others but in systems meant to protect. The world narrows to threats and avoidance. Even moments of safety feel temporary. Tammy was navigating all of this in real time. She continued reaching out where she could, continuing to document, continuing to hope that clarity would arrive before harm did. But the escalation moved faster than solutions. Each day added weight. Each night removed rest. What stands out most in this final period is not a single, dramatic incident, but accumulation. The stacking of fear, the layering of stress, the gradual erosion of resilience. By the end, Tammy was no longer reacting to individual events. She was surviving an ongoing experience of intimidation, and that experience left little room to breathe. When the final moments arrived, they did not come without warning. They came after days of pressure that had already taken their toll. After signals that were noticed, discussed, and ultimately constrained by uncertainty. After a window where action felt necessary, but impossible to define. The countdown had been underway, and by the time it ended, the damage was already done. When the full timeline of Tammy King's case is laid out in sequence, the picture becomes clearer and more troubling. What once appeared as isolated disruptions now connect as part of a slow, deliberate progression. Anonymous calls were not random. Packages were not mistakes. Minor vandalism was not coincidence. Each event built upon the last, quietly escalating until the outcome could no longer be undone. Seen together, the pattern tells a story of persistence rather than impulse. The earliest incidents tested boundaries. The later ones reinforced presence. And the final days revealed pressure that had been steadily mounting for weeks. None of these moments alone seemed sufficient to predict what would happen. But together, they formed a trajectory, one that moved forward while those around Tammy struggled to define it in real time. This is where the unanswered questions begin. Who was responsible, and when did their intent become irreversible? At what point did inconvenience turn into threat? And how many moments of hesitation, by Tammy, by loved ones, by institutions, allowed the escalation to continue unchecked. Some questions remain unresolved because the evidence never fully caught up with the behavior. Others remain unanswered because systems are often designed to respond to certainty, not intuition. Tammy's case sits at the intersection of those two realities. It forces a difficult conversation about prevention. Threats are not always loud. Danger does not always announce itself. Many cases unfold in spaces where fear is present but difficult to prove, where behavior feels wrong but not yet illegal, where action feels necessary but authority requires clarity. That gap between discomfort and certainty is where many people are left unprotected. Tammy's experience highlights how easily patterns can be overlooked when viewed in fragments. It shows how repetition can be dismissed when context is missing, and it reveals how psychological harm can accumulate long before physical harm occurs. The lasting impact of this case extends beyond its conclusion. For those who knew Tammy, the loss reshaped their understanding of warning signs. Ordinary moments gained new meaning. Conversations were replayed, details reconsidered. The question of what if not as blame, but as grief searching for understanding. For communities, cases like this serve as reminders that vigilance is not paranoia, that documenting concerns matters, that listening, especially when fear is quiet, can be life-saving. There is no single solution that prevents every tragedy, but awareness changes outcomes. Patterns matter, escalation matters, and support matters, especially when someone struggles to articulate why they feel unsafe. If there is one lesson this timeline leaves behind, it is that fear does not need to be dramatic to be real. People experiencing ongoing intimidation often minimize it themselves, unsure of how to ask for help when nothing concrete has yet occurred. That hesitation can be costly. Conversations about cases like Tammy King's are not about revisiting tragedy for spectacle. They are about recognition, about ensuring that when similar warning signs appear elsewhere, they are taken seriously sooner. If you or someone you know is experiencing repeated unexplained contact, intimidation, or a growing sense of being watched, trust that instinct. Document it, talk about it, seek support early. Silence benefits only the person causing, and for viewers, engagement matters. Sharing stories, discussing patterns, and supporting victims before harm escalates are all part of prevention. Awareness creates pressure for systems to evolve, to respond not just to crimes that have already occurred, but to threats still unfolding. Tammy King's story does not end with answers. It ends with responsibility to notice, to listen, and to act before quiet warnings become irreversible outcomes. On the morning of September 11, 2009, the Lake Highlands apartment in Dallas felt unnaturally quiet as Ashley Oliver Vera unlocked the door and stepped inside. Days of unanswered calls and texts had already left her uneasy, but the silence inside the apartment deepened that fear. She called out for Shelly Nance, expecting a familiar response, yet nothing came back. Walking down the hallway, Ashley noticed Shelly's bedroom door slightly open, an unsettling detail she couldn't ignore. She pushed it wider and froze. Shelly Nance lay face down on her bed, motionless, blood soaking into the sheets beneath her. Panic took over as Ashley backed away, her hands shaking while she dialed 911. Within minutes, responders rushed to the Dallas apartment, confirming the Shelly Nance murder. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle outside the bedroom. A normal morning became the start of a true crime story. Shelly Nance was born and raised in the small town of Italy, Texas, where everyone seemed to know one another. From early childhood, she showed a natural artistic talent, often filling sketchbooks with detailed drawings inspired by everyday life. Her family recognized her gift quickly and supported her dreams, encouraging creativity inside a close, tight-knit community that proudly celebrated her achievements. Shelly regularly entered school art contests and participated in local exhibitions, gaining confidence with each recognition she received. Friends described her as warm, ambitious, and endlessly uplifting, someone whose positive energy made others feel seen and encouraged. Art was not her only passion. She loved music, enjoyed traveling when possible, and constantly searched for inspiration in people, places, and moments around her. Shelley dreamed of becoming a professional artist and believed her creativity could shape a meaningful future. In the Shelley Nance case, her life would later be remembered not only for tragedy, but for promise. The young artist murdered in this Texas college murder was a tragic young woman whose future was just beginning. Those who knew her believed her dedication, kindness, and imagination would carry her far beyond Texas, leaving a lasting creative mark on the world. After graduating high school, Shelley Nance was accepted into the Art Institute of Dallas, a milestone that marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Leaving Italy, Texas behind, she transitioned from a quiet small town to a fast-paced city filled with opportunity. The change was challenging, but Shelley embraced it with optimism and determination. At the Institute, she focused on both computer design and traditional art, eager to master modern tools while honoring classic techniques. Her professors quickly noticed her creativity, often praising her dedication, originality, and willingness to push artistic boundaries. Shelley developed a distinctive style that blended hand-drawn elements with digital methods, setting her work apart from her peers. Outside the classroom, she explored the Dallas art scene, visiting galleries, studying local exhibitions, and drawing inspiration from the city's culture. Each experience reinforced her belief that she was on the right path. As a college student murdered far too soon, her journey would later become part of the Art Institute of Dallas murder story. At the time, Shelley was simply a hopeful art student, convinced her future was bright and her dreams were finally within reach as she planned exhibitions, careers, growth, success, independence confidently. Shelley Nance shared her Dallas apartment with Ashley Oliver Vieira, a fellow student who quickly became one of her closest friends. Living together during the pressures of college life created a strong bond built on trust, encouragement, and mutual support. Ashley often described Shelley as caring and dependable, someone who was always ready to listen or offer reassurance during stressful moments. Alongside this friendship, Shelley was in a relationship with Nathan Shuck, another student at the Art Institute. The two shared artistic ambitions and spent long hours talking about creative ideas, future careers, and shared goals. To friends and classmates, the relationship appeared healthy and stable, grounded in common interests and mutual respect. They were frequently seen together at school events and working on projects side by side. However, beneath this calm surface, subtle tensions began to draw quiet attention. Some people noticed unease surrounding Nathan's roommate, Daniel William, whose behavior toward Shelley seemed increasingly uncomfortable. While nothing appeared openly hostile, there were moments of visible jealousy and awkward interactions that stood out. In hindsight, these early signs would later gain chilling significance in a true crime narration involving boyfriend-roommate jealousy and a devastating roommate-killed-roommate case that shattered what once seemed like an ordinary call. Edge life. Daniel William was Nathan Shuck's roommate, a figure who initially blended into the background of Shelley Nance's life. At first, Daniel appeared quiet and reserved, someone who kept to himself and rarely drew attention. He spoke little in group settings and often seemed socially withdrawn, which caused few people to question his presence. Over time, however, his behavior began to change in subtle but unsettling ways. Friends noticed that Daniel watched Shelley from a distance, lingering in shared spaces longer than necessary and paying close attention to her interactions with Nathan. His comments, once harmless, slowly became passive-aggressive, often dismissive of Shelley or critical in tone. Shelley herself began to feel uneasy around him, sensing a tension she couldn't fully explain. She mentioned to close friends that Daniel's presence made her uncomfortable, though she tried to downplay her concerns to avoid conflict. As weeks passed, jealousy started to surface more clearly. Daniel's fixation appeared less about Shelley herself and more about her relationship with Nathan, creating a dangerous emotional imbalance. What seemed like awkward behavior was, in reality, the early warning signs of an obsessed roommate murder, driven by jealous obsession and violent obsession psychology that would soon escalate beyond anyone's expectations. The crime scene inside Shelley Nance's bedroom revealed a level of violence that was shocking in its intensity yet disturbing in its order. Shelley had been stabbed 42 times, with the majority of wounds concentrated on her neck and back, indicating a sudden and furious attack. Despite the brutality, there were no signs of a struggle elsewhere in the apartment. Furniture remained undisturbed, doors and windows intact, and nothing suggested forced entry. Investigators found no evidence of theft, and there were no indications of sexual assault. Shelley's personal belongings were left untouched, reinforcing the belief that this was a personal motive murder rather than a random crime. The bed where she was found appeared to be the sole focus of the attack, suggesting she was caught off guard and overwhelmed quickly. This brutal stabbing murder carried the hallmarks of rage directed at one person alone. In the 42 stab wounds case, the absence of chaos outside the bedroom became as telling as the violence itself. The no forced entry murder pointed investigators toward someone Shelley trusted, someone who knew her routine and felt close enough to cross her threshold without resistance and intent, was deeply personal and deliberate. Detectives from the Dallas Police Department began a real murder investigation immediately, carefully securing the apartment and documenting every detail. Inside Shelley Nance's bedroom, investigators discovered a small bloody footprint near the doorway, evidence that did not match Shelley's shoe size. The bloody footprint evidence suggested the killer had moved quickly and left traces behind. During a search of the apartment, officers also found a torn Ziploc bag containing Shelley's blood and strands of her hair, a disturbing discovery that pointed toward deliberate handling after the attack. This Ziploc bag evidence raised urgent questions about intent and cleanup. Neighbors were interviewed, and one reported seeing a suspicious man lingering near the apartment complex the night before, dressed in dark clothing. While the description was vague, it reinforced concerns that the killer was familiar with the area. As the forensic evidence murder findings mounted, detectives shifted their focus inward toward Shelley's inner circle. Nathan Schuck was questioned extensively due to his close relationship with Shelley. As interviews continued, attention quietly began settling on Daniel William, whose behavior and proximity to the victim made investigators increasingly uneasy. His name surfaced repeatedly as inconsistencies, and uneasy reactions slowly became harder to ignore entirely. As investigators continued piecing together the timeline, surveillance footage became a turning point in the premeditated murder case. Walmart surveillance footage from the night of September 10, 2009, showed Daniel William inside the store purchasing gloves, cleaning supplies, and multiple Ziploc bags. The receipt was time-stamped only hours before Shelley Nance was believed to have been killed, placing Daniel in a critical window of time. This Walmart surveillance murder evidence suggested preparation rather than impulse. Additional footage later showed Daniel entering Shelley's apartment building late that same night carrying a small bag. In the early morning hours, he was captured leaving the building again, this time without the bag, a detail investigators found deeply troubling. When police searched Daniel's room, they uncovered obsessive journal evidence that exposed his mindset. The pages were filled with entries focused on Shelley, her relationship with Nathan, and Daniel's growing resentment. One recurring theme stood out clearly. Shelley was described as an obstacle, someone who stood between Daniel and what he believed should be his. In one entry, he wrote that "she's in the way," a chilling statement that reflected emotional fixation rather than frustration. The incriminating diary murder writings revealed escalating anger and a belief that removing Shelley would solve his internal conflict. Combined with the purchases, the movements caught on camera, and the disturbing journal entries, investigators began to see a clear picture forming. What once appeared to be awkward jealousy now looked like calculated obsession, supported by deliberate actions taken before and after the murder, pointing directly toward planning rather than coincidence. Forensic testing began to close the net around Daniel William as results returned from multiple sources. Blood DNA evidence was detected on his shoes, matching Shelley Nance and contradicting his claims of never entering her bedroom. Investigators used luminol evidence to examine the footwear and surrounding items, revealing clean stains that were invisible to the naked eye. Additional blood traces were later discovered inside Daniel's car, placing him in direct contact with the victim after the attack. Phone records added another critical layer, showing his device pinging near Shelley's apartment during the estimated time of death. When confronted with these findings, Daniel's alibi began to collapse. His earlier statements no longer aligned with digital data, surveillance timing, or forensic results. Each explanation introduced new inconsistencies rather than clarity. Detectives now viewed the case as a trusted killer crime, one driven not by opportunity but by fixation. The evidence painted a clear narrative of a jealousy-driven homicide, supported by science rather than speculation. With physical proof, location data, and behavioral patterns aligning, investigators believed the case against Daniel had reached a decisive point, leaving little room for doubt about who was responsible for Shelley's murder, and justice finally felt inevitable. On November 15, 2009, Daniel William was formally arrested after investigators concluded their case. He was charged with first-degree murder, a decision rooted in the volume of forensic and circumstantial evidence presented. The case moved into the courtroom, drawing attention as a disturbing murder trial documentary in real time. During testimony, Nathan Schuck described Daniel's behavior in the months leading up to Shelley's death, explaining how jealousy, possessiveness, and fixation had steadily intensified. Prosecutors highlighted surveillance footage, forensic findings, and the journal entries to establish intent and planning. The defense argued that the case relied too heavily on circumstantial connections, claiming there was no direct witness to the killing itself. Despite these arguments, the accumulation of evidence told a consistent story. After deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, finding Daniel guilty. The first-degree murder conviction confirmed that the killing was deliberate and premeditated. In sentencing, the judge emphasized the brutality of the attack and the calculated nature of Daniel's actions. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom true crime proceedings brought a measure of justice, though no verdict could restore the life that was taken or erase the damage caused. In the aftermath of Shelley Nance's murder, her family faced an unending grief that reshaped their lives. Determined that her death would not be meaningless, they became advocates for awareness around violence and obsession, speaking openly about the dangers of ignored warning signs. The Shelley Nance Memorial Scholarship was created to support young artists, allowing her passion for creativity to live on through others. Art shows and exhibitions were held in her honor, celebrating the talent and imagination she never had the chance to fully share with the world. In every brushstroke and tribute, Shelley was remembered not for how she died, but for how brightly she lived. This crime aftermath documentary leaves behind a quiet warning. Obsession kills, often silently, fueled by hidden jealousy crime that grows unnoticed. Justice for Shelley Nance came through the courts, but her story remains a haunting reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how devastating unchecked fixation can become.
A powerful political figure and his wife vanish without a trace. Their sudden disappearance sends shockwaves through the city, setting off a desperate search. But when investigators start connecting the dots, the truth that emerges is more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The prime suspect? Their own granddaughter. Samara, a city with a deep history and a strategic location along the Volga River, is a place where power, business, and crime have always been entangled. Behind its modern skyline and bustling industrial hubs lies a darker world, one where fortunes are made in the shadows and alliances can be as deadly as they are profitable. For years, the missing man had been at the center of it all. He wasn't just a politician, he was a force in Samara's elite circles, someone who shaped policies and controlled vast wealth. His wife, equally powerful in social spheres, was his closest confidant. But now, both of them had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of questions. And the most chilling part? Every piece of evidence pointed to their granddaughter. Why would she commit such an unthinkable crime? Was it about money? Revenge? Or was there something far more sinister behind her silence? And most importantly, was she really acting alone? Viktor Terov, the family's patriarch, built his empire from the ground up. Born in Kuibyshev, he started as a Soviet-era chemical engineer but had ambitions far beyond the laboratory. Over the years, he climbed the political ranks, using his knowledge of industry and his connections to cement his place among Samara's elite. Eventually, he reached the pinnacle of power, becoming the city's mayor, a position that granted him not only political influence but also deep control over the region's economy. With that power came immense wealth. The Terov family lived in luxury estates, owned fleets of high-end cars, and had access to privileges that few could imagine. Business leaders, politicians, and even criminal figures sought their approval, knowing that Viktor's influence could open doors, or shut them permanently. But behind the facade of wealth and stability, cracks were beginning to form. Old alliances were shifting, and the next generation of the Terov family had become a wild card in their carefully controlled world. And soon, that instability would lead to a crime so shocking that it would shake Samara to its core. Katerina Terova was born into a life of privilege in 1995. Unlike most children, she never knew limits, there were no restrictions, no boundaries, and certainly no financial struggles. Growing up in the Terov dynasty, she had everything handed to her. Expensive gifts, private tutors, exclusive parties, money was never an issue. Her mother, Luda Terova, had been raised as the heir to the family's power, but instead of following in her father's footsteps, she chose a very different path. By the 1990s, she was deeply embedded in the criminal underworld, surrounding herself with figures from organized networks. Despite the opportunities her family's influence provided, she was drawn to high-risk ventures, dangerous relationships, and illegal dealings. Her first husband, Konstantin Sherbakov, was connected to one of Samara's most powerful crime syndicates. When he was killed in 2001, she quickly moved on, eventually marrying Sergei Laganov, a man notorious for his involvement in large-scale oil fraud. His illegal dealings brought in millions, but in 2010, his empire collapsed when he was arrested for orchestrating an attack on a federal agent. He was sentenced to prison, leaving Luda to fend for herself. But she didn't stay out of trouble for long. By 2022, she was arrested for blackmail after attempting to extort money from a regional deputy with threats of public humiliation. Her plan failed spectacularly, and she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Meanwhile, Katerina had already carved out a reckless path of her own. Unlike her mother, she had no need to hustle for wealth, it was always there. But her indulgent spending habits, her love for the nightlife, and her growing dependency on prohibited substances quickly spiraled out of control. She was reckless, entitled, and completely unprepared for a life without the safety net of her grandfather's money. And when that safety net was pulled away, her desperation would lead her to unthinkable actions. Katerina Terova's life was a downward spiral in slow motion. What started as a life of luxury and privilege turned into something far more destructive. She had no financial discipline, no career ambitions, and no real responsibilities, just an endless cycle of extravagant spending and reckless indulgence. But as her habits escalated, so did the consequences. She had long been drawn to Samara's elite party scene, where alcohol and prohibited substances were commonplace. What started as casual indulgence soon turned into full-blown dependency, consuming her life and leaving her desperate to maintain her expensive habits. In 2016, while in Cyprus, she met an Israeli citizen, and their whirlwind romance quickly led to marriage. By 2017, they had a son, but family life didn't change her ways. She continued to drink heavily, cause public scandals, and behave erratically. Her husband tolerated it for a while, but by 2019, he had enough. He filed for divorce, took custody of their child, and Katerina returned to Samara, abandoning her responsibilities as a mother. Back home, she expected life to continue as before, but her finances were crumbling. The money wasn't coming in as fast as she was spending it. She maxed out credit lines, borrowed from acquaintances, and when that wasn't enough, she started selling off valuables, designer handbags, jewelry, family heirlooms, anything that could bring in cash. But her biggest problem came when her grandfather, Viktor Terov, finally cut her off. Realizing that she had no intention of changing, he reduced her financial support, trying to force her into responsibility. Instead of learning from it, Katerina saw it as a betrayal. The one person who had always funded her lifestyle was now standing between her and the only thing she truly cared about, money. Her resentment festered, turning into full-blown rage. And at some point, she came to a chilling realization: if Viktor and Natalia Terov were gone, all of their wealth would be hers. By 2023, Katerina Terova's financial situation had hit rock bottom. She was drowning in debt, with creditors demanding repayment, but she had no job, no income, and no way to maintain the lavish lifestyle she refused to let go of. At first, she tried to access her grandfather's wealth legally. She attempted to convince him to sign over assets, pushed for more financial help, and even tried to sell family heirlooms behind his back. But Viktor Terov wasn't a fool. He had spent decades in politics and business. He knew how to protect his wealth. He refused to give her control over his assets, cutting her off even further. That's when she realized the truth. As long as Viktor and Natalia were alive, she would never have the money she needed. But if they were gone, she would inherit everything. She began planning. Not impulsively, but methodically. She researched different methods, poisons, blunt force trauma, ways to eliminate evidence. She read about forensic investigations, how authorities track digital footprints, and ways to dispose of bodies without a trace. Then, she started making suspicious purchases. Plastic barrels, chemical agents, heavy-duty bags, and protective suits, all ordered online, paid for using various accounts to avoid suspicion. She had a plan, but there was still one question left unanswered: how would she execute it? In early January 2025, Viktor and Natalia Terov suddenly vanished. No calls. No sightings. Nothing. To their friends, it made no sense. Viktor was always reachable. His silence alone was an immediate red flag. But before anyone could piece it together, Katerina was already in the middle of covering her tracks. What happened next would shock the entire country. In January 2025, Viktor and Natalia Terov vanished without a trace. No warnings, no goodbyes, just silence. At first, no one panicked. They were influential figures, constantly moving between business meetings and high-profile social events. But when their phones remained off for days, people started to worry. Viktor never ignored calls, especially from his closest associates. On January 3rd, he missed multiple important messages, including a birthday greeting from a longtime friend. That was the first real sign that something was wrong. Then came the suspicious message. One of Viktor's former deputies received a text from his phone. The message was short and vague, all questions to Katerina. That alone set off alarms. Viktor was known for his professionalism, always writing in perfect grammar. But this message? It didn't sound like him at all. As the hours passed, more people tried reaching the couple, but neither responded. No public appearances, no security footage, no financial transactions. It was as if they had simply disappeared. Concerned, Viktor's assistant filed an official missing persons report. Within hours, investigators were searching for clues, looking through bank records, phone logs, and surveillance footage. And soon, all signs began pointing to Katerina. When police entered Viktor and Natalia Terov's residence, something felt off. The apartment was too clean, unnaturally spotless, as if someone had gone out of their way to erase any trace of what had happened. Forensic specialists began testing surfaces, and their suspicions were confirmed. Traces of chemical agents were found throughout the home, the kind often used to eliminate biological evidence. A more thorough search revealed microscopic blood residue in the bathroom and kitchen. When tested, it was identified as belonging to Viktor and Natalia Tarov. But that wasn't all. Surveillance footage showed Katerina Tarova carrying a large blue plastic barrel into the apartment before her grandparents' disappearance. Later, the same barrel was seen outside the building, but its contents were unknown. She was also seen disposing of heavy-duty bags, though their contents were never recovered. Investigators then turned to her financial activity, and what they found only deepened their suspicions. In the days following the disappearance, there were multiple failed attempts to access Viktor's online bank accounts. Someone was trying to transfer large sums of money, but the transactions were blocked due to security measures. At the same time, Katerina was selling off her grandparents' valuables at an alarming rate: jewelry, religious icons, even Natalia's car. She was desperate for cash. With every clue leading back to her, the police had enough to move forward. It was time to bring Katerina in. Forensic experts continued their investigation, and what they uncovered only confirmed their worst fears: this wasn't a disappearance. It was a crime. In the bathroom and kitchen, investigators detected microscopic traces of blood, invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable under forensic analysis. DNA tests confirmed the worst: the blood belonged to Viktor and Natalia Tarov. But there was something even more disturbing. The absence of a large amount of blood suggested that the bodies had not been dismembered in the apartment. Instead, forensic experts believed that chemical agents had been used to dispose of the remains. Security footage and witness statements provided another chilling detail. Neighbors reported seeing an unidentified man near Katerina's apartment around the time of her grandparents' disappearance. Some believed he helped her carry heavy objects, possibly assisting in disposing of evidence. His identity remained a mystery, but authorities suspected he wasn't just a bystander. Investigators then turned their focus to a landfill site, one of the suspected disposal locations. A large-scale search was conducted, sifting through tons of waste in hopes of finding anything that could confirm what had happened. But by the time authorities searched the site, it was too late. The sheer volume of trash, combined with time and decomposition, meant that nothing conclusive was found. Still, the evidence against Katerina was mounting. And soon, the police had enough to make their move. When authorities arrived at Viktor Tarov's apartment to arrest Katerina, she didn't resist. She didn't cry, panic, or even ask why she was being detained. Instead, she remained cold, emotionless, as if the situation didn't concern her. At the station, investigators began their interrogation, but Katerina was far from cooperative. At first, she refused to speak, claiming she felt unwell. When she finally did, her statements were inconsistent, contradicting both the evidence and her own previous claims. She insisted she had nothing to do with her grandparents' disappearance, saying they had left on their own. But investigators had already uncovered her financial transactions, her attempts to access Viktor's accounts, and her rushed sale of family assets, clear signs of a financial motive. When confronted with the forensic evidence, the blood traces, the chemical agents, and the surveillance footage of her handling the barrel, she changed her story again. But her explanations made no sense, and the investigators weren't buying them. Although no physical remains had been found, the forensic evidence was overwhelming. Katerina had no alibi, no logical defense, and every clue pointed to one conclusion: she had planned and executed the crime herself. And now, she was facing the consequences. Katerina Tarova's trial became one of the most sensational court cases in recent history. The brutal nature of the crime, the powerful family involved, and the shocking betrayal captivated the nation. News outlets covered every detail, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal analysts, and spectators eager to witness the downfall of a once privileged heiress. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum penalty, a life sentence. They presented an airtight case: financial motive, forensic evidence, suspicious purchases, and Katerina's own erratic behavior. Everything pointed to a cold-blooded, premeditated murder carried out in pursuit of wealth. But one question remained: did she act alone? Investigators suspected she had help, possibly from Vitaly Lukin, an inmate she had been in frequent contact with before the crime. Phone records showed multiple conversations and money transfers between them, but there was no concrete proof linking him to the murder. Without hard evidence, he remained under suspicion but was never formally charged. The public was divided. Some saw her as a ruthless, entitled murderer, driven by greed and desperation. Others believed she was a pawn, manipulated by criminals more powerful than her. Adding to the mystery, Katerina suddenly stopped speaking altogether. During court hearings, she appeared detached, unresponsive, and unwilling to answer questions. Was she suffering from genuine psychological distress, or was this a carefully crafted legal strategy? The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation, one that could determine whether Katerina was truly broken or simply playing the system. As the trial continues, the nation watches, waiting for the final verdict. Katerina Turova remains in custody, her silence unbroken, while prosecutors present their final arguments. The court has yet to decide her fate, but one thing is certain: this case will be remembered for years to come. Beyond the legal battle, the consequences of her actions ripple far beyond the courtroom. Her young son, now without a mother, remains in legal limbo. With his father living abroad, the question of custody remains unresolved. Meanwhile, Viktor Terev's vast fortune, estimated at millions, is frozen, tangled in legal disputes. Under Russian law, Katerina is barred from inheriting anything due to her conviction, leaving the fate of the Terev Empire uncertain. This case stands as one of the most shocking and sensational crimes in Russian history, a chilling tale of wealth, greed, and betrayal that shattered an influential family. Was Katerina a calculating murderer, or was she just a product of the corrupt world she was raised in? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was justice served? Do you believe she acted alone? If you found this case fascinating, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the most shocking crimes of our time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Janae Gagnier was born in 1987 in Los Angeles to Mark and Janetta Gagnier. Her parents came from a strict military background, where discipline and structure were a part of everyday life. After serving in the armed forces, they decided to leave that world behind and focus on building a business. Their dream was to open a restaurant, and over time, it became their life's work. Janae was the eldest of 3 sisters, and she shared a strong bond with them. Her upbringing was structured but not overly strict. Her parents believed in discipline, but they also encouraged independence and personal ambition. From an early age, Janae showed signs of an entrepreneurial mindset. At just 12 years old, she started her first business, braiding hair in her family's garage. What began as a small setup for friends and classmates quickly grew as word spread throughout the neighborhood. Soon, women lined up in the evenings to get their hair done by her. This small business gave her a sense of financial independence, something she took great pride in. Her childhood, however, took a difficult turn when she turned 14. Her parents decided to separate, and the divorce was far from peaceful. The conflicts between them created an emotionally tense environment that affected her deeply. The situation worsened when her father moved to Texas, leaving her and her sisters behind in Los Angeles. This sudden change created a divide in her family and left her feeling abandoned. She began struggling in school, her once outgoing nature turned withdrawn, and her relationship with her mother became strained. What her parents saw as typical teenage rebellion was, in reality, her way of coping with the collapse of the family she once knew. After finishing high school, Janae enrolled in college with plans to become a dental assistant. She saw it as a stable career that would provide financial security, but within a few months, she realized it was not the right fit. The coursework felt dull, and the idea of working in the field for the rest of her life did not excite her. Despite her parents' disappointment, she made the difficult decision to drop out and look for a new direction. Around this time, she met a man who promised her a fresh start. He convinced her to move to Las Vegas, assuring her that the city was filled with opportunities. Excited by the idea of something new, she packed her bags and left California behind. However, starting over was not as easy as she had imagined. Without a college degree or job experience, she struggled to find work that paid well. Most of the available jobs offered low wages and long hours, making it difficult to support herself. Through acquaintances, she learned about high-paying opportunities in the nightclub industry. At first, she was hesitant. It was a world she knew little about, and she was unsure if she would fit in. but financial pressure pushed her to give it a try. Her first few shifts were overwhelming, but she quickly realized that the earnings were far better than any other job she could get. Within weeks, she was making around $5,000 a week, enough to live comfortably and start saving for the future. As she became more familiar with the industry, she saw how women used their appearances and personalities to build connections with wealthy clients, celebrities, and business figures. She understood that standing out was the key to success, so she created a bold and unforgettable persona. She became Mercedes Moore, a name that commanded attention and set her apart from the crowd. While working in exclusive clubs, she noticed the growing power of social media. She started posting regularly on Instagram, showing glimpses of her luxurious lifestyle, and quickly gained attention. Wealthy individuals and influencers began following her, boosting her online presence. She used networking opportunities to appear in the posts of well-known figures, which helped her account grow even more. Within a short time, her follower count skyrocketed, reaching 3 million. She was no longer just another woman in the nightlife industry. She had become a social media personality with a massive audience. As Mercedes Moore's online presence continued to grow, she realized that relying on club work was not a long-term solution. She had built a brand around her image, and there were now millions of people following her every move. She saw how other influencers were using their social media fame to generate income in different ways, and she began looking for ways to take full control of her earnings. She no longer wanted to depend on late-night shifts or club promoters to make money. That was when she discovered OnlyFans, a platform that allowed content creators to earn through paid subscriptions. She saw how others were making significant income from exclusive content, and she decided to give it a try. With her already massive following, her page quickly gained thousands of subscribers. Within a few months, she was making more than she ever had before. Financial stability allowed her to leave the nightclub industry for good and focus entirely on her online brand. Despite her success, her relationship with her family remained tense. Her parents had always wanted her to take a more traditional career path, and they struggled to accept the choices she had made. They saw her new career as unstable and controversial, but Mercedes stood firm in her decisions. She had worked hard to build her independence, and she was happy with where she was in life. Over time, the arguments became less frequent, but the distance between them remained. With her growing success, she decided to move to Houston and settle into a gated community. She wanted privacy, security, and a place where she could finally feel safe. Her new home gave her the space to focus on personal projects, and she began planning to launch her own clothing line. Around this time, she also started a new relationship with a man who was not in the entertainment industry. Unlike her past experiences, this relationship was private and away from media attention. She seemed to have reached the peak of her success, financially independent, personally fulfilled, and in control of her future. But what she did not realize was that fame had also attracted something far more dangerous. Among the millions who followed her, there were some who did not just admire her from a distance. Some saw her as more than an influencer. One of them believed he was meant to be with her, and he was willing to do anything to make that happen. As Mercedes Moore's social media following continued to grow, so did the attention she received. At first, it was flattering. People admired her lifestyle, commented on her photos, and engaged with her posts. But over time, something shifted. Among the millions who followed her, there were those who took their admiration too far. What had once been harmless fan engagement turned into an unsettling obsession. At first, the signs were subtle. Strangers left comments under her posts that felt a little too personal. Some claimed to know where she lived. Others mentioned seeing her in certain places, even though she had never publicly shared her location. She dismissed it at first, assuming it was just people trying to get her attention. But then the messages became more specific. People were not just guessing where she lived, they were posting her home address in the comments. She deleted these messages as quickly as she could, hoping to keep her location private. But the problem did not stop. Soon, the online harassment turned into something far more terrifying. Strangers started showing up at her house, ringing her doorbell at all hours. Some left gifts on her doorstep. Others waited outside, hoping for a chance to see her in person. At first, she told herself that these were isolated incidents, just a few obsessive fans who would eventually lose interest. But the unwanted visitors kept coming. The fear of being watched became overwhelming. She began to feel trapped in her own home, never knowing who might be outside. To protect herself, she stopped tagging her location in posts. She was careful not to show any identifying details in her photos. If she went out, she waited until she was back home before sharing pictures. She even started blurring small background elements to make sure no one could figure out where she was. But no matter how careful she was, it seemed like people still knew where to find her. The situation became so stressful that she decided to move to a gated community in Houston. She hoped that added security would give her peace of mind. The neighborhood had controlled entry, security cameras, and private access, which meant no one could just walk up to her house anymore. She finally felt like she could breathe again. But what she did not know was that someone had already found her. One of her followers had been watching her more closely than anyone else. He had studied every detail of her online presence, piecing together information that no one else had noticed. He was not just another fan. He believed he had a special connection with her, something that no one else could understand. And in his mind, the only thing left to do was meet her in person. Mercedes thought she had taken every precaution, but she had no idea that the nightmare was only just beginning. Kevin Accordo lived in Florida, far from the world of luxury and fame that Mercedes Moore had built for herself. To those around him, he seemed like an ordinary man. He had no criminal history, no history of violence, and nothing in his past suggested that he was dangerous. But behind closed doors, his mind was consumed by something no one else could see. He had become obsessed with a woman he had never met. Mercedes was not just an influencer to him. In his mind, she was someone special, someone he believed he had a connection with. He followed her every move online, studying every post, every caption, and every detail in her photos. He watched her stories, read the comments under her pictures, and paid close attention to the locations she visited. He convinced himself that he understood her in a way that no one else did. At first, his obsession was limited to watching from a distance. But over time, watching was no longer enough. He needed to be closer to her, to see her in real life, to prove that the bond he imagined was real. The problem was, Mercedes had taken great care to keep her personal life private. She never shared her exact location, and she rarely posted in real time. But Kevin was patient. He analyzed every post, looking for small details that could help him find her. Then, he found what he was looking for. In one of her pictures, there was a reflection of her front door. It was barely noticeable to most people, just a background detail. But to Kevin, it was the final clue he needed. He compared the image to online real estate listings and read through fan comments until he confirmed the name of her residential complex. That was all it took. Without hesitation, he packed his bags and got into his car. He drove thousands of miles from Florida to Texas, convinced that he was about to change both of their lives forever. To him, this was not a crime. This was destiny. Kevin Accordo arrived in Houston after days on the road. He had traveled across multiple states, driven through the night, and barely stopped to rest. None of that mattered to him. All he could think about was Mercedes Moore and the moment he would finally see her. The gated community where she lived was designed to keep people like him out, but he was determined. Security at the entrance made it difficult for outsiders to enter, but Kevin found a way in. Surveillance footage later showed him walking around the area, appearing to scout the neighborhood. Investigators believe he may have slipped in behind another resident's vehicle as they entered, avoiding detection. Another possibility was that he posed as a delivery driver, blending in just enough to pass unnoticed. However, he managed to get inside. One thing was clear, he had reached her home. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door and windows were intact, meaning he either convinced Mercedes to open the door or forced his way in once she was close enough. The exact moment of the attack is unknown, but what happened inside was brutal. Mercedes fought back. Evidence of a violent struggle was found throughout the house. Bruises on her arms and defensive wounds on her hands showed that she resisted as much as she could. But Kevin had the physical advantage. He was stronger, and once he overpowered her, there was no escape. Her cause of death was asphyxiation. He strangled her until she stopped breathing, refusing to let go. Most people would have fled after committing such a crime, but Kevin did not leave. Instead, he stayed inside her home for 3 days. For 72 hours, he lived in the space of the woman he had just killed. He ate food from her refrigerator, used her personal belongings, and moved through the rooms as if he belonged there. During those 3 days, he also left behind disturbing messages. Written in red lipstick across mirrors and walls, his words were a mix of regret, obsession, and anger. Some messages hinted at betrayal, suggesting that he believed Mercedes had wronged him in some way. One phrase suggested she was wearing another man's ring. Others were more erratic, the handwriting uneven and rushed, evidence of a deeply disturbed mind. For 3 days, no one knew what had happened. Mercedes' phone remained silent. Calls and messages went unanswered. From the outside, everything looked normal, but inside that house, the nightmare had already unfolded. Mercedes Moore had always been active on her phone. Whether it was texting friends, updating her social media, or calling family, she was never completely silent. So when days passed without a response, her family began to worry. Her father, Mark Gagnier, grew increasingly concerned. He had tried calling and messaging her multiple times, but there was no reply. At first, he assumed she might be busy or traveling, but something did not feel right. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, he decided to check on her in person. He drove to her house in Houston, hoping he was overreacting. But as soon as he arrived, his fears deepened. Her car was still parked in the garage, which meant she had not left the house. He rang the doorbell. No answer. He knocked louder, calling her name. Still, nothing. He tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Peering through the windows, he saw that the curtains were drawn. The house was silent, but something felt off. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and forced his way through the door. The moment the door swung open, a strong, overwhelming odor filled the air. It was thick, suffocating, and unmistakable. His stomach turned as the realization hit him. Something terrible had happened here. As he stepped inside, his eyes fell on the staircase. At the bottom, Mercedes' lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor. Her skin was pale, her clothing stained with dried blood. She was gone. For a moment, he could not move. He felt frozen, unable to process the scene in front of him. But then, he heard something upstairs. He looked up and saw movement on the second floor. At first, he thought it was his daughter. He wanted to believe she was still alive. But as he focused, he realized it was someone else. A man. Collapsed on the ground, barely breathing. Kevin Accordo was still alive, but just barely. He had stabbed himself in the chest, an apparent suicide attempt. Blood pooled around him, and his body trembled slightly. But within seconds, he went completely still. Mark ran up the stairs, but it was too late. Kevin took his last breath right in front of him. Investigators arrived minutes later and found disturbing writings covering the walls and mirrors. Scrawled in red lipstick, the messages made no sense, a mix of guilt, anger, and obsession. Whatever had been going through Kevin's mind in those final moments, one thing was clear: Mercedes never saw it coming. When investigators pieced together the events leading up to Mercedes Moore's death, they confirmed what her family had feared the most: she had never met Kevin Accordo before that night. There was no past connection, no private conversations, and no reason for him to believe they had any kind of relationship. He had been a delusional stalker who had followed her online, convinced himself they shared a special bond, and ultimately tracked her down in real life. There was no trial, no conviction, and no chance for justice. Kevin had taken his own life, leaving behind only cryptic messages and a shattered family. With him gone, there were no legal proceedings, no answers to the lingering questions, and no closure for those who had lost her. As soon as the news broke, the public reaction was immediate. Mercedes' case sparked a national conversation about the dangers of social media fame and the risks that influencers face. Many questioned how someone could become so obsessed with a person they had never met, while others pointed out how easy it had been for Kevin to find her. But just as quickly as the truth came out, misinformation flooded the internet. Rumors spread across social media, with people speculating about the cause of her death. Some falsely claimed she had died from a drug overdose, while others suggested it was a result of COVID-19. A more bizarre theory alleged that her death had occurred during an intimate encounter gone wrong. Authorities had to step in and confirm the facts. Mercedes had not died of an overdose, illness, or any of the other false rumors. Her death was the result of something far more terrifying, a man who had turned his online obsession into real-life violence. The loss of Mercedes Moore left her family shattered. Her father, Mark Gagnier, could not escape the image of what he had seen that night. The moment he forced open the door, the unbearable smell, the sight of his daughter lying lifeless at the bottom of the stairs, it replayed in his mind over and over again. No parent should ever have to find their child that way, and yet, that was the reality he was forced to live with. Her younger sisters lost more than just a sibling, they lost their role model, their protector, and their guide. Mercedes had always been the one they looked up to, the person who made them believe they could achieve anything. Now, there was only emptiness where she had once been. Her mother, Janetta, struggled to cope with the grief. She could not understand how a stranger had taken her daughter away. How could someone who had never met Mercedes feel entitled to her life? The weight of those questions, questions that would never be answered, became impossible to bear. In the months following her death, Mark Gagnier decided to speak out. He wanted the world to know that what had happened to his daughter was not just a tragedy, it was a warning. He became an advocate for influencer safety, urging those who live their lives in the public eye to take extra precautions. Fame was no longer just about success, it was about survival. Mercedes' story remains one of the most chilling examples of social media obsession gone too far. What started as admiration turned into something deadly. She never knew her killer, but he had known everything about her. On the evening of April 3, 2008, a quiet neighborhood in Nashville was shaken by the discovery of a terrible crime. What seemed like a perfect life for a housewife took a dark turn, leading to an affair that ended in violence. The investigation would reveal layers of lies, betrayal, and a deadly obsession that tore a family apart. Emma Lewis was known in her neighborhood as the ideal housewife. At 34, she had 2 children with her husband, Mark Lewis, a hard-working construction foreman. They lived in a simple but comfortable home in a peaceful part of Nashville, Tennessee. Emma was admired for her kindness and devotion to her family. On the outside, her life seemed perfect, a loving husband, 2 beautiful children, and a warm home. But, like many stories that seem perfect, there were secrets hidden beneath the surface. Mark, who was 36, had been with Emma for more than 10 years. He was a quiet man who focused on his work and his family. His long hours at construction sites kept him away from home, but he believed it was worth it to provide a good life for his family. Mark was proud of what he had built, a stable home, financial security, and what appeared to be a happy marriage. Emma's cousin, Sarah, had always been close to her. They grew up together like sisters, sharing their childhood secrets and teenage dreams. Sarah was married to James Carter, a successful real estate agent who was known for his charm and good looks. The 2 couples often spent time together, attending family events and neighborhood gatherings. Over the years, something changed in Emma. Despite having everything she had ever wanted, she began to feel empty. Mark was always working, often leaving before sunrise and returning after sunset. His dedication to his job, though admirable, left little time for Emma. She felt more and more lonely. Their conversations became short, mostly about the children or household matters, and the passion that once filled their marriage had faded. During this time, James Carter, Sarah's husband, started giving more attention to Emma. He was everything Mark was not, charming, attentive, and always ready with a compliment or a smile. James had a reputation for flirting, but Emma had never taken it seriously. However, as Mark became more distant, Emma found herself drawn to James's charm. At family gatherings, James made her laugh with his jokes, and they had long conversations when Sarah was busy with the children. He seemed truly interested in her thoughts and feelings, something she had not felt from Mark in years. The more time they spent together, the stronger their connection became. What began as friendly talk slowly turned into something more, something dangerous. By late 2007, Emma and James had started a full affair. They were careful, meeting in secret whenever possible, making sure no one would suspect anything. Their relationship was passionate, filled with excitement and the risk of being caught. For the first time in years, Emma felt alive, wanted, and desired. Everything fell apart on April 3, 2008. Mark came home earlier than usual and found Emma dead in their kitchen. Her body lay in a pool of blood with a single stab wound to the chest. In shock, Mark called 911, his voice shaking as he struggled to understand what had happened. The Nashville Police Department arrived at the Rodriguez home early the next morning. Detective John Davis, known for his careful and detailed investigations, was assigned to the case. The crime scene was carefully examined. At first, it seemed like a burglary that had gone wrong, but there were no signs of forced entry. The way Emma had been targeted suggested something else. The police began talking to neighbors. But no one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. 2 days later, on April 6, 2008, Detective Garcia started questioning the people closest to Emma, beginning with her husband, Mark. Mark sat across from Garcia in a small, dimly lit interview room at the police station. His face showed deep sadness, and his eyes were red from days of crying. He looked truly heartbroken over his wife's death. He insisted that he had no enemies and could not think of anyone who would want to hurt Emma. When asked about their relationship, Mark admitted that things had not been perfect. He said Emma had been distant in recent months, but he thought it was because of the stress of managing the house and raising their children while he worked long hours. Garcia pressed Mark about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. Mark explained that he had been at work all day, leaving early in the morning and returning home around 5 p.m. when he found Emma's body. He gave the names of his co-workers who could confirm his alibi. Garcia followed up with Mark's employer and co-workers. They all confirmed that Mark had been at the job site from 7 a.m. until almost 5 p.m. With Mark's alibi strong, Garcia had to look for answers elsewhere. Next, Detective Garcia focused on Emma's cousin Sarah and her husband, James Carter. The interview took place at the Cortez home. The couple sat together on the living room sofa, holding hands tightly. Sarah was clearly upset, her voice shaking as she talked about her relationship with Emma. She said they had been more like sisters than cousins. But in the last few months, she had noticed a change in Emma. She had become more distant, less talkative, and seemed to be carrying a heavy burden that she refused to share. Sarah thought it might be due to problems in her marriage, but she had never pushed Emma to talk about it. James Carter, on the other hand, seemed much calmer. He said he was shocked by Emma's death and claimed he had no idea who could have done such a thing. When asked where he was on the day of the murder, James said he had been at a business meeting for most of the day. He gave details about the meeting and names of people who could confirm his story. Garcia took note of James's calm behavior. Unlike Sarah, who was clearly shaken, James seemed in complete control of his emotions. This stood out to Garcia as unusual, considering the circumstances. As Garcia finished the interviews, he had a strong feeling that there was more to the story than what had been revealed. Sarah's comments about Emma's recent behavior suggested deeper issues, and James's calmness in the face of such a tragedy was unsettling. Garcia knew he had to look further. He told his team to check James's alibi and to keep a close watch on both him and Mark as the investigation continued. On April 8, 2008, Garcia and his team made a breakthrough. During a routine check of Emma's phone records, Garcia noticed a series of text messages that stood out. The messages were romantic and personal, exchanged with a contact saved under a fake name. This discovery raised immediate concerns for Garcia. He suspected these messages could be a key to understanding what had happened to Emma. The texts revealed a side of her life that no one had known about, a secret relationship that she had carefully kept hidden from both Mark and Sarah. Garcia ordered his team to trace the number linked to the fake contact's name, hoping it would lead them to the truth. When the trace results came back, they revealed that the number belonged to James Carter, Sarah's husband. This discovery shocked Garcia, as it confirmed that Emma had been having an affair with her own cousin's husband for almost a year. Emma and James had been extremely careful. They communicated mostly through coded messages and only met in places where they would not be seen together. Their relationship gave Emma the attention and affection she had been missing, but it also put her in a dangerous position. Since both were married, their affair was like a ticking time bomb that could destroy both families. 2 days later, on April 10, 2008, James was brought in for questioning again. This time, Garcia had a different approach. Now armed with clear evidence of the affair, he was determined to get more out of James. At first, James remained calm and collected. But Garcia wasted no time and showed him the text messages. James tried to deny everything, claiming the messages were meaningless and that there was nothing serious between him and Emma. But as Garcia pushed him with more details, James began to lose his composure. The weight of the evidence was too much to ignore, and under pressure, James finally admitted to the affair. He confessed that his relationship with Emma had been passionate and intense, but he insisted it was just a mistake. He claimed he never planned to leave Sarah and that he had ended things with Emma just weeks before her death. He described the affair as something that had gotten out of control, but according to him, it was in the past. With this new information, Garcia decided to question Sarah. When confronted, Sarah broke down in tears. She admitted that she had suspected James of being unfaithful for a while, but had never imagined that he was involved with her own cousin. Sarah said she had noticed changes in James's behavior, his frequent absences, his secret phone calls, but she had never directly confronted him. Despite her suspicions, she had believed his excuses until Garcia showed her the truth. The revelation devastated her, but she had no information that directly connected James to Emma's murder. She was heartbroken over the betrayal but was just as clueless about the murder as the investigators had been. James strongly insisted that he had nothing to do with Emma's death. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. On the morning of April 3, 2008, Mark left for work as usual, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Emma and James had planned to meet that day. James told Sarah he had a business meeting, while Emma made sure her children were at school. She waited for James to arrive, unaware that this meeting would be their last. Emma made sure everything was perfect. The house was spotless, her appearance carefully prepared, every detail just right for their meeting. Around noon, James arrived at the Rodriguez home. Emma greeted him at the door, and within moments, they were in each other's arms. But something unexpected happened. In the heat of the moment, Emma moaned her husband's name. The atmosphere changed immediately. The passion disappeared, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Suddenly, she felt overwhelmed with guilt. She still loved her husband. What was she doing? She asked herself if this was the life she wanted. There was tension in the air, a feeling neither of them could explain. Maybe it was the guilt building up inside her, or maybe it was the fear of getting caught. Their usual excitement was now mixed with something darker. They argued. Emma was becoming more anxious about their affair being discovered. She no longer felt comfortable and told James she wanted to end things. But James refused. He insisted that they could continue as long as they were careful. His confidence only made Emma more uneasy. The argument quickly grew worse. Jealousy, frustration, and the stress of their secret pushed them to the edge. Then, in a moment of anger, Emma threatened to tell Sarah if James did not leave her alone. That was when everything changed. In a blind rage, James grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. What happened next was a blur. Before either of them could fully process it, Emma was on the floor, blood spreading around her. The knife slipped from James's trembling hand. Panic took over. James grabbed the knife, barely thinking about what he was doing. He did not even clean it. He only knew that he needed to get out of there. He ran to his car, his mind spinning with the horrifying reality of what he had just done. The woman he had claimed to love was now lying dead in her own kitchen. Back to the case, after these shocking revelations, the investigation became more urgent. Detective Garcia and his team worked day and night to collect more evidence linking James to the murder. On April 12, 2008, they made a breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a nearby store showed James in the area on the day of the murder. This directly contradicted his claim that he had been in a business meeting. When Garcia dug deeper, he found out that the meeting James had mentioned had actually been canceled. His alibi had completely fallen apart. On top of that, forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed a partial fingerprint on the back door of the Rodriguez house. When tested, it matched James. When questioned, he claimed that he must have left the print during a previous visit. But Garcia did not believe him. The evidence against James was becoming overwhelming. By April 15, 2008, Detective Garcia had everything he needed. The surveillance footage, the fingerprint, the broken alibi, and the motive from the affair all pointed to one clear conclusion. James had killed Emma. That afternoon, a warrant was issued for James Carter's arrest. He was taken into custody without resistance and charged with the murder of Emma Lewis. The arrest sent shockwaves through both families and the entire community. The affair, which had been hidden for almost a year, was now exposed for everyone to see. The damage was irreversible, and the consequences would haunt them all forever. James's actions had not only taken Emma's life, but had also destroyed his own marriage and broken the trust between two families. As he sat in his jail cell waiting for trial, the weight of his choices began to sink in. What had started as a secret affair had spiraled into a deadly confrontation, leaving destruction in its path. As the case moved toward trial, the prosecution built a strong case against James Carter. They described him as a man who could not handle the pressure of his double life and chose murder to keep his secret hidden. The defense, however, argued that there was no solid proof that James had killed Emma. They suggested that someone else who knew about the affair could have framed him. On May 5, 2008, James's trial began, drawing widespread attention from both the media and the local community. The courtroom was packed with people eager to see how the case would unfold. Reporters lined the hallways, and the trial became a daily topic of conversation in Nashville, Tennessee. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their argument. They presented a clear timeline of events supported by strong evidence. The text messages between Emma and James played a major role in the case, showing not only their affair but also the rising tension between them. These messages painted a picture of a relationship that had become unstable in the weeks leading up to Emma's death. Next, the prosecution showed surveillance footage that placed James near the Rodriguez home on the day of the murder. This directly contradicted his claim that he had been at a business meeting, which had been proven to be canceled. The footage showed that James had lied about his whereabouts, making it harder for him to explain his innocence. The prosecution also introduced forensic evidence. A partial fingerprint was found on the back door of the Rodriguez house, and it was matched to James. He had tried to explain it away by saying he had visited the house before, but the prosecution argued that the print was fresh and could not be ignored. This physical evidence played a key role in linking him to the crime. Witnesses were called to testify about the troubled relationships between the two couples. Neighbors and friends spoke about how Emma and Mark had grown distant and how James had become more secretive and withdrawn. These testimonies helped establish a motive, suggesting that James was under intense pressure as his affair with Emma started to unravel. One of the most emotional moments of the trial was Mark Lewis's testimony. He described the day he found his wife's body, his voice filled with grief and disbelief. He spoke about the shock of not only losing Emma but also learning about her affair with James. His pain was clear to everyone in the courtroom, reminding them of the real human loss behind the case. Sarah Carter also took the stand. Her testimony was filled with heartbreak and betrayal. She explained how she had always trusted James but had suspected something was wrong in the months before Emma's death. She described how she confronted James after his arrest and how she slowly realized the full extent of his lies. She spoke about how their marriage, once strong, had fallen apart under the weight of his deceit. Her pain was evident as she shared how James's actions had destroyed their lives. Throughout the trial, the evidence against James continued to build. The prosecution argued that James Carter had acted out of desperation. Faced with the threat of Emma exposing their affair and ruining his marriage, James chose to silence her forever. The evidence, both physical and from witness testimonies, showed a man who had reached his breaking point and made a deadly decision to protect his secret. As the trial continued, the jury listened carefully, knowing they were deciding the fate of a man who had torn two families apart. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case against James was strong. The entire community followed the trial closely, aware that the verdict would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a decision. James Carter was found guilty of second-degree murder. Though some parts of the evidence were circumstantial, there was enough proof to convince the jury that he was responsible for Emma's death. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. After the trial, Sarah filed for divorce from James, walking away from the life they had built together. She moved out of Nashville, hoping to start fresh and escape the painful memories. Mark Lewis, still struggling with the loss of his wife and the betrayal, remained in the home where the tragedy happened. Every corner of the house was a reminder of the life he once had. The neighborhood, once a lively and friendly place, was never the same. The whispers of the affair and murder lingered, serving as a warning of how secrets could lead to disaster. Emma Lewis's tragic death remains a powerful reminder of the dangers of deceit and how far people will go to protect their secrets. In the end, what started as a hidden romance turned into a deadly obsession. But this is nothing compared to the case where a housewife's secret affair with her neighbor's son ended in death. The family and neighborhood drama only continues. Watch the next story and subscribe for more. In the small town of Somerville, Texas, where the church was the heart of the community, a shocking scandal unfolded. A preacher's secret affair with a lonely woman led to jealousy, betrayal, and murder, shaking the town to its core. This is a story of love gone wrong, a life lost, and justice that changed Somerville forever. In 2012, Somerville was a quiet town where life moved at a slow pace. People gathered for Sunday church services, shared meals at community dinners, and spent evenings talking on their porches. At the center of it all was Pastor Daniel Cross, a man deeply respected by his congregation. His sermons brought people to tears, and his presence gave them comfort. But behind his role as a preacher, Daniel was struggling with loneliness. Daniel's marriage to Eleanor Cross was far from happy. Eleanor came from a wealthy and powerful family in Somerville. Her father owned many businesses, and her mother was the most important figure at church events. Eleanor followed in their footsteps, caring more about social status than real connections. She loved throwing fancy parties and making sure people talked about the Cross family. But with Daniel, her love was distant and cold. For years, Daniel tried to fix their marriage, but Eleanor was not interested. She wanted to maintain the perfect image of a preacher's wife. As long as Daniel played his role, she was satisfied. But inside, he felt empty. He longed for someone who truly saw him, not just as a pastor, but as a man. Then, he met Cassandra Walker. Cassie, as people called her, was facing her own struggles. She had married Tom Walker, a serious and emotionally distant man, not out of love but because she had no other choice. Tom, a mechanic, spent more time at his garage than at home. Their marriage felt like an empty house, functional but without warmth. At 34, Cassie felt her life had passed her by. She had no children, no excitement, and no real purpose. One evening in March 2012, at a church fundraiser, Cassie caught Daniel's eye. She wore a simple dress that suited her well, and her laughter filled the room. But beneath her charm was a deep sadness, one that Daniel recognized because he felt it too. That night, Cassie approached Daniel with a plate of homemade cornbread and a smile that lingered a little too long. Their conversation started with small talk about the church's roof repairs, but soon turned personal. Cassie admitted she often felt like she did not belong in Somerville. Daniel listened closely, his expression softening. In that moment, he felt understood, something Eleanor had not given him in years. As weeks passed, they found themselves drawn to each other. It began with simple smiles during Bible study. Cassie started staying behind after church events, finding reasons to help Daniel clean or organize. Their moments together carried an unspoken tension, a connection growing between them. By May 2012, their stolen glances had turned into something more. They arranged to meet in private. At first, it was at Cassie's home when Tom worked late. Later, they met at a small motel on the edge of town. These moments felt thrilling and dangerous. Cassie found in Daniel the emotional bond she had longed for. Daniel, in turn, felt alive in a way he had not in years. Their affair quickly became an obsession. Cassie became careless, leaving traces of her perfume on Daniel's shirt and lipstick marks on his collar. Daniel tried to resist, praying for strength each night, but his willpower was slipping. By September 2012, Cassie started feeling different. She felt sick often, always tired, and had a strange heaviness in her body. A visit to the local clinic confirmed what she already suspected: she was pregnant. The news brought both fear and excitement. During one of their secret meetings at the motel, she told Daniel. The moment she spoke the words, panic spread across his face. For Cassie, this baby was a new beginning, a chance to leave behind the small, suffocating town of Somerville. She imagined a fresh start with Daniel, raising their child far from the judgmental eyes of the community. But for Daniel, this was a disaster. He already struggled with guilt over the affair, and now the thought of a child threatened to destroy everything he had built. He could not abandon his congregation, and he could not face Eleanor. Cassie begged him to see the life they could have together. She spoke about a future free from pretense, where they could finally be happy. Daniel listened, but his fear held him back. He told her he needed time to think, though deep inside, he felt frozen, unable to act. What they did not know was that Eleanor had started to grow suspicious. She noticed Daniel's late nights, his distracted mind, the way he seemed distant even when he was home. Eleanor was not the kind of woman who accepted betrayal. Her marriage to Daniel was not just about love, it was about status, power, and keeping up appearances. If a scandal broke, her perfect image would shatter, and she would not let that happen. Determined to find out the truth, she began watching Daniel closely. One evening in early October, after Bible study, she followed him, staying just far enough behind so he would not notice. When she saw him enter a motel where Cassie was waiting, her worst fears were confirmed. To Eleanor, this was more than just an affair, it was an attack on everything she had worked for. If the town found out, her reputation would be ruined. Her family's name, her standing in the church, everything would be destroyed. For weeks, she said nothing, quietly plotting her next move. Then, one afternoon, while organizing donations at the church, she overheard Cassie speaking to a friend. Cassie mentioned her pregnancy, though she never named the father. But Eleanor did not need to hear her name. She knew. That moment was the breaking point. This was no longer just about an unfaithful husband, Cassie was carrying Daniel's child. The thought filled Eleanor with rage, but she did not lash out. Instead, her anger turned cold and calculated. She would not simply confront Cassie. She would make sure that Cassie and her unborn child would never be a threat to her life again. On a stormy night in mid-October 2012, Eleanor sat in the dim glow of her living room, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. Rain pounded against the windows, matching the storm inside her mind. The betrayal, the pregnancy, the humiliation, it all played over and over in her head. For Eleanor, this was not just jealousy. It was survival. If the truth came out, she would lose everything. Her marriage to Daniel had protected her, given her power in a town where image was everything. Now, Cassie threatened to destroy it all. Eleanor knew she could not reason with Daniel. He was weak, easily swayed by emotion. Cassie, however, was another story. In Eleanor's eyes, Cassie was reckless and selfish, a woman who had no place in her world. The fact that she carried Daniel's child was the ultimate insult, proof that Cassie had won in a way Eleanor never could. And Eleanor could not let that happen. On the evening of October 17, 2012, she made her final decision. Eleanor reached out to Cassie, pretending she wanted a private conversation to make peace. She played on Cassie's emotions, making it seem like an opportunity to talk things through. Cassie, perhaps too trusting, agreed to meet. Eleanor carefully chose the location, an old barn on the outskirts of Somerville, a place where no one would disturb them. As rain poured down, Eleanor arrived first, carrying an umbrella and a heavy candlestick hidden in her bag. She waited, her mind racing. When she saw Cassie step out of her car, soaked from the rain but determined, a surge of hatred filled her. Inside the barn, the confrontation began. Eleanor wasted no time accusing Cassie of destroying her marriage and ruining her life. Cassie did not back down. She admitted to the affair and revealed her pregnancy, hoping Eleanor would face the truth. But instead of calming her, the confession acted like fuel on a fire. Eleanor snapped. Her vision blurred with rage as they argued. Cassie still believed there was some kindness in Eleanor and tried to reason with her. But Eleanor was not listening. She saw only a threat that needed to be removed. The argument turned into a struggle. Cassie tried to defend herself as Eleanor's anger grew. In the heat of the moment, Eleanor pulled out the candlestick and swung it with all her strength. It struck Cassie on the side of her head. The force of the blow sent Cassie crashing to the ground. Blood pooled beneath her. Eleanor froze, staring at what she had done. Then, in panic, she dropped the candlestick and ran, leaving Cassie's lifeless body behind. The next morning, October 18, 2012, the rain had stopped, but an eerie silence hung over Somerville. A local farmer, Henry Mathus, was checking on his livestock near the old barn when he noticed something strange. The barn door was slightly open, moving with the wind. Curious, he stepped inside and immediately recoiled at the sight before him. Cassie's body lay on the cold, damp floor. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. Blood had dried in a dark pool around her head. Nearby, the candlestick rested, still stained with blood. Horrified, Henry ran back to his truck and called the police. By 9 a.m., investigators had swarmed the barn. Detective Lauren Martinez, known for her sharp instincts, arrived at the scene. She examined the area carefully, noting the brutality of the attack. The blow to Cassie's head was strong and deliberate. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had been caught off guard. The investigators worked methodically, collecting evidence and documenting everything. They bagged the candlestick, noting the fingerprints on its surface, and photographed the blood patterns around Cassie's body. Detective Martinez could not shake the feeling that this was not a random crime. The attack felt personal, driven by anger and betrayal. By October 20, 2012, police had started questioning those closest to Cassie. The first person they brought in was her husband, Tom Walker. Tom's reaction to his wife's death was unusual. He seemed detached, as if he had already accepted the loss long before. He admitted their marriage had been strained for years and even revealed that he knew about Cassie's affair. Tom claimed he did not care enough to act on Cassie's affair. Detective Martinez found his lack of emotion unsettling, but after careful observation, she believed his reaction came from resignation rather than guilt. With little evidence connecting him to the crime, investigators started exploring other possibilities. On October 24, 2012, they made a breakthrough. A search of Cassie's belongings uncovered a hidden collection of love letters exchanged between her and Pastor Daniel. The letters were detailed, describing their affair and Cassie's hopes for a future with him. Detective Martinez immediately brought Daniel in for questioning. Overcome with guilt, he admitted to the affair but firmly denied any involvement in Cassie's death. He spoke of his struggles with faith, his failing marriage, and the burden of betraying his congregation. His confession sent shockwaves through Somerville. The town's beloved pastor was now at the center of a scandal that threatened to tear the community apart. As the investigation continued, suspicion turned toward Eleanor. Witnesses recalled her increasingly unpredictable behavior in the weeks before Cassie's death. While she remained composed in public, those close to her noticed cracks in her carefully controlled image. The case took a decisive turn on November 1, 2012. Investigators executed a search warrant at the Cross estate and found a blood-stained scarf hidden in Eleanor's closet. The fibers on the scarf matched those from the crime scene, and forensic testing confirmed that the blood was Cassie's. The evidence was undeniable. Combined with her clear motive and erratic behavior, everything pointed to Eleanor as the killer. On the morning of November 15, 2012, police arrived at the Cross residence to arrest her. She was hosting a brunch for the church's women's group, one final attempt to maintain her perfect image. As officers led her away in handcuffs, the room fell silent. The women who had once admired her grace and strength now stared in shock. Eleanor kept her composure, but her eyes betrayed her fear. The people of Somerville were stunned. Their ideal preacher's wife was now the prime suspect in a murder case. Everything they believed about their town and its leaders was falling apart. Eleanor's arrest was only the beginning. The town now had to face the truth hiding in plain sight. The trial began in March 2013 at the county courthouse in Somerville. The town had never seen anything like it. News of the case spread far beyond the county, drawing reporters, curious spectators, and legal experts from neighboring areas. Every day, the courtroom was packed. Community members filled the seats, many of them former admirers of Eleanor. The tension in the air was heavy, as people watched the woman they once respected fight for her freedom. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Lisa Thompson, a determined and experienced lawyer. From the start, she made it clear that Eleanor was not a woman who had acted out of momentary rage. She was cold, calculating, and willing to kill to protect her image. Thompson presented the evidence found in Eleanor's home, the blood-stained scarf, witness testimonies, and the details of her behavior leading up to the murder. She built a story of control, jealousy, and premeditation. She reminded the jury that Eleanor's crime was not a result of passion but a deliberate act to remove a threat from her life. The defense, led by well-known attorney Charles Grant, faced a difficult challenge. He argued that Eleanor had acted in a moment of emotional distress, pushed over the edge by her husband's betrayal and the shame of Cassie's pregnancy. Eleanor's defense attorney, Charles Grant, argued that her actions resulted from a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by rage, not premeditation. He urged the jury to consider the emotional toll she had endured in the months leading up to the murder. Throughout the trial, the emotional strain on all involved became evident. Pastor Daniel Cross, once the town's moral guide, emerged as a key witness. He openly admitted to his affair with Cassie, describing how their shared loneliness evolved into a relationship he deeply regretted. Daniel portrayed Eleanor as someone obsessed with appearances, prioritizing her public image over their marriage. He spoke of her cold demeanor, which had driven him into despair. Despite revealing these painful truths, Daniel expressed profound remorse for his role in the tragedy, his voice trembling as he recounted how guilt had led him to resign from the church. The courtroom remained silent during his testimony, with only Eleanor's sharp breaths breaking the stillness. She sat at the defense table, her face impassive, though her eyes occasionally revealed flashes of emotion, perhaps anger or shame. Throughout the trial, Eleanor maintained her innocence, showing no remorse for what had transpired. To some, her cold demeanor reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of her as capable of murder. Witnesses, including neighbors and church members, testified about Eleanor's behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder. They described her as increasingly erratic, a stark contrast to the polished and composed woman they thought they knew. Some recalled overhearing her complain about Cassie, her words filled with disdain and fury. A pivotal moment in the trial occurred when the prosecution presented photographs from the crime scene. The gruesome images of Cassie's lifeless body and the blood-stained candlestick starkly reminded everyone of the violence that had occurred. Many in the courtroom turned away, unable to look, but Eleanor stared straight ahead, unflinching. The trial lasted nearly 3 weeks, with every detail meticulously examined and debated. By the time the jury began deliberations on March 18, 2013, the community of Somerville was deeply divided. Some believed Eleanor was a victim of her circumstances, while others saw her as a ruthless woman who would stop at nothing to protect her social standing. On March 20, 2013, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Eleanor Cross was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Cassie's few remaining family members wept quietly in the back row. Pastor Daniel lowered his head, a mixture of relief and sorrow etched on his face. Eleanor remained expressionless, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as the sentence was read: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the town of Somerville, the trial's conclusion marked the end of a long and painful chapter. However, the repercussions of Eleanor's actions, and those of everyone involved, would ripple through the community for years to come. The fallout from the trial was immediate and far-reaching. Pastor Daniel Cross, unable to reconcile his faith with his sins, resigned from his position at the church. On April 5, 2013, he delivered his final sermon to a somber congregation. Many in the church were torn between their anger at his betrayal and their sympathy for his evident remorse. Afterward, Daniel packed his belongings and left Somerville, retreating to a small town where he hoped to rebuild his life in anonymity. Tom Walker, Cassie's estranged husband, quietly sold their home and moved away from Somerville in May 2013. The town, once tight-knit and proud, struggled to come to terms with the scandal and tragedy that had unfolded within its community. The events served as a stark reminder of the hidden complexities and dark undercurrents that can exist beneath even the most idyllic surfaces. Tom Walker never attended the trial or made any public statements about Cassie's death. His silence left many wondering how much he had truly cared for her. Some whispered that he felt relieved to be free from their marriage, while others believed his departure was a sign of grief too deep to express. For Emily Cross, Eleanor, and Daniel's teenage daughter, the events were devastating. At just 14 years old, she had to face the truth about her mother's crime and her father's affair. In June 2013, she moved to Dallas to live with extended family, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. Her departure was the final blow to the Cross family, a once respected household now broken beyond repair. Somerville, once a town known for its close-knit community and southern charm, became a place haunted by scandal and loss. The church struggled to recover, its attendance dropping as members wrestled with the betrayal of their trusted pastor. The story of Eleanor's trial and Daniel's affair became a whispered warning, repeated in homes and diners for years. The town had learned a painful lesson: no matter how perfect things appear, darkness can hide beneath the surface. And when that darkness is unleashed, the consequences can be devastating. What pushes a person to kill just to protect their reputation? How do love and faith twist into betrayal and tragedy? The case of Somerville serves as a reminder that behind closed doors, even those who seem righteous can fall to their darkest sins. On May 4, 2018, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Drive remained undisturbed. Olivia Brooks stepped into the bedroom. She made a horrifying discovery: her husband Ethan Brooks was lying there, motionless. His body was unnaturally still, his skin pale and cold. A belt was wrapped tightly around his neck, his eyes fixed in a vacant, lifeless stare. The sight was haunting, and for a moment, Olivia could not breathe. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, her hand flying to her mouth to suppress the scream threatening to break free. She felt panicked and reached for her phone with unsteady hands, her fingers struggling to press the right buttons. Olivia's voice was barely audible, her breath shaky as she stammered, "My husband, he is not breathing. I think he is dead." The dispatcher immediately began asking questions, trying to keep her calm while gathering essential details. The minutes stretched endlessly as Olivia stood frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from the horrifying scene before her. Within moments, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. The paramedics arrived quickly, their expressions serious as they entered the bedroom. One of them stepped forward, checking Ethan for any signs of life, while another gently guided Olivia away, sensing her distress. "It is too late," one of the paramedics murmured under his breath. The confirmation sent a fresh wave of devastation crashing over Olivia. A strangled sob broke free as she clutched her chest, her knees buckling beneath her. The room felt suffocating, the weight of reality pressing down on her as the paramedics worked to secure the scene. Outside, the street remained eerily quiet, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded behind the closed doors of the Brooke residence. Ethan Brooke was a self-made millionaire and the chief executive officer of Brooke Technologies Incorporated. At 39 years old, he had built an empire that placed him among the most influential figures in the technology sector. His journey had started in Bedminster, New Jersey, where he spent his childhood and attended local schools. From an early age, he displayed a keen interest in computers, spending countless hours dismantling and reassembling hardware, eager to understand how things worked. His passion for technology led him to Stanford University, where he pursued a degree in computer science. After graduation, Ethan co-founded his first company with a former classmate, developing software solutions for small businesses. Within a few years, his ambitions grew, and he launched Brooke Technologies Incorporated. His company quickly gained recognition after introducing a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform that transformed the industry. The platform's advanced capabilities caught the attention of investors, major corporations, and media outlets, propelling Ethan to widespread recognition. As Brooke Technologies flourished, so did Ethan's public presence. He became a sought-after speaker at global technology conferences, sharing insights on innovation and entrepreneurship. His name frequently appeared in leading business magazines, and he was a guest on major news networks, discussing the future of artificial intelligence. During one such conference, Ethan met Olivia, an event planner responsible for organizing the high-profile event where he was the keynote speaker. Their initial interaction was brief, but fate brought them together again at a charity gala weeks later. Their connection was immediate, and their relationship quickly blossomed into a whirlwind romance. Their wedding was an extravagant affair, attended by leaders from both the technology and social elite. Together, they were admired as a formidable power couple. Ethan had been eagerly anticipating his 40th birthday celebration, which Olivia was meticulously planning. The grand event was set to take place on a luxurious yacht overlooking the Manhattan skyline, but the celebration would never happen. Ethan's life had been tragically cut short just weeks before the milestone event. Detective Emily Rodriguez and her partner, Detective Michael Chen, arrived at the Brook residence shortly after the paramedics confirmed Ethan Brooks' death. The two seasoned investigators stepped out of their vehicle, their sharp eyes scanning the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Drive. The street, typically peaceful, was now lined with onlookers whispering among themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. Inside the house, the scene was grim. The bedroom was in disarray, suggesting that something violent had taken place. 2 coffee mugs sat on the floor, one of them bearing a faint trace of lipstick. A partially eaten packet of cookies lay nearby, its wrapper crumpled. A silk nightgown, draped over a bedside lamp, added to the unsettling atmosphere. The bed covers were tossed aside, and the sheets were untucked, as though there had been a struggle. Ethan Brooks' lifeless body remained on the bed, his exposed skin marked by bruises. A belt was wrapped tightly around his neck, leaving deep impressions in his flesh. His hands were slightly curled, and underneath his fingernails, investigators noticed what appeared to be skin or fibers, possible evidence of a struggle. Detective Rodriguez walked around the room, her gaze sharp and calculating. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing in the house appeared ransacked. This suggested that Ethan had either let his attacker inside willingly or had been in their company before the violence erupted. The forensic team moved quickly, working with precision. Luminol was sprayed across the room, revealing faint traces of bodily fluids on the carpet near the bed. Samples of hair and fibers were carefully collected from the bedding and surrounding area. Every potential piece of evidence was bagged and documented, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Detective Chen carefully lifted the belt from Ethan's neck, inspecting it closely before placing it into an evidence bag. "This could be our murder weapon," he murmured, handing it off to the forensic team for further analysis. Outside, the weight of the tragedy was beginning to settle over the neighborhood. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out, hesitant to step outside but unable to resist their curiosity. Some whispered to one another, speculating about what had happened inside the house. Others remained silent, shaken by the knowledge that something so horrific had occurred just doors away. The investigation was only beginning, but one thing was certain: this was no accident. The evidence suggested that Ethan Brooks had been murdered, and whoever was responsible had made sure to leave behind as few traces as possible. Olivia Brooks was the first person detectives called in for questioning. Less than 24 hours after discovering her husband's lifeless body, she sat inside the sterile walls of the police interrogation room. Her hands were clasped together on the metal table, her fingers intertwined tightly. Across from her, Detective Emily Rodriguez and Detective Michael Chen observed her closely, noting every movement, every hesitation. Olivia took a deep breath before speaking, her voice shaking slightly. She claimed that on the night of May 3rd, she had been working late at a venue, finalizing details for an upcoming wedding event. She insisted she had spent the entire evening there, only returning home later that night, long after Ethan had presumably gone to bed. Her words were confident, but her actions told a different story. She was eager, too eager, to establish her alibi, repeatedly emphasizing that she had no involvement in Ethan's death. She mentioned her emails, her phone records, and even the venue staff who could confirm her presence. The detectives exchanged a glance, recognizing the familiar signs of someone desperately trying to convince them of the truth. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward, keeping her tone neutral. "You must have been exhausted after working so late. Did anyone see you leave?" Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her head. "No, I left quietly. It was late, and I did not want to bother anyone." Detective Chen noted the way her hands fidgeted, her fingers pressing against each other as though trying to relieve tension. She avoided direct eye contact, her gaze shifting to the walls, the floor, anywhere but the detectives' faces. Her breathing was steady, but her voice held an underlying tremor that betrayed her nerves. Rodriguez folded her arms. "We will need to verify that." Olivia forced a nod, though her lips pressed into a tight line. As soon as she left the station, the detectives got to work. Surveillance footage from the event venue would confirm whether she had truly been there all night as she claimed. If there was any inconsistency in her story, they would find it. And if Olivia Brooks had something to hide, it would only be a matter of time before the truth surfaced. Detectives Rodriguez and Chin reviewed the surveillance footage from the event venue where Olivia claimed to have been working late. As they fast-forwarded through the hours of recorded video, one detail stood out: Olivia never appeared at the venue that evening. There was no record of her arriving or leaving. Confused, they widened their search and checked nearby locations. Their efforts led them to security footage from a hotel just a few blocks away. There, at approximately 4:30 p.m. on May 3rd, Olivia was seen checking into a room. She did not appear alone for long. An hour later, a man entered her hotel room. He wore a fedora and sunglasses, making it difficult to see his face clearly. He remained inside for several hours, and at around 3 a.m., he finally left. Just minutes after, Olivia stepped out, looking around cautiously before following him to the parking lot. The two shared a kiss before parting ways and driving off in separate directions. Detective Chin exhaled sharply. So much for working late at the venue. Rodriguez nodded. She was never there. She was with him all night. As they continued digging, another discovery raised further suspicion. Olivia had not only lied about her whereabouts, but she had also canceled all her scheduled work meetings for both May 3rd and May 4th, the same days surrounding Ethan's murder. The next step was to identify the mystery man. A closer analysis of the footage and a check through hotel records revealed his name, a 23-year-old fitness model and entrepreneur known online as the Muscle Lucas. Rodriguez pulled up his profile on social media. His page was filled with images of his chiseled physique, luxury cars, and cryptic motivational quotes. He had amassed a large following, particularly among older women, many of whom left adoring comments on his posts. Chin leaned back in his chair. If he was involved with Olivia, we need to find out just how deep this connection goes. With Olivia's alibi now completely shattered and a new suspect in the mix, the case was beginning to take a darker and more complex turn. The man identified as the Muscle Lucas was more than just a fitness coach. At 23 years old, he had built a massive social media following, branding himself as an entrepreneur, lifestyle coach, and physique model. His carefully curated online persona showcased a life of luxury, exotic cars, high-end vacations, designer clothes, and exclusive parties. His followers, primarily older women, flooded his posts with admiration, often referring to him as charming, irresistible, and dangerously seductive. However, beyond the surface, rumors surrounded Lucas's profession. He was suspected of offering more than just personal training sessions. His name had been whispered in exclusive social circles, allegedly maintaining a black book filled with wealthy, influential women who sought companionship, guidance, and something far more intimate than fitness coaching. Detective Rodriguez studied his profile carefully. He does not just sell workout plans, she muttered. Chin scrolled through the comments section, where older women left flirtatious remarks beneath his photos. If what people say is true, his business model is unconventional. Their biggest question remained: what was his relationship with Olivia? Was she just another client, someone who had paid for his services, or was their connection something deeper? Olivia had gone to great lengths to keep their involvement hidden. She had checked into a hotel under a different name, she had lied about her whereabouts, and she had canceled all her work meetings during the time frame surrounding Ethan's murder. Lucas's sudden presence in Olivia's life raised several red flags. If he had nothing to do with the crime, why had Olivia been so secretive about him? And if he had something to gain, could he have been involved in orchestrating Ethan's death? Detectives Rodriguez and Chin knew that they had to move quickly. Lucas was not just a mysterious figure in Olivia's personal life, he was now a key suspect in the murder of Ethan Brooke. Lucas was brought into the police station for questioning. He walked into the interrogation room with an air of confidence, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He sat across from Detective Rodriguez and Detective Chen, his hands resting casually on the table. Unlike many suspects who fidgeted under pressure, Lucas did not seem nervous at all. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Do you know why you are here?" Lucas shrugged slightly. "I assume this is about Ethan Brooke." Chin studied him carefully. You assume correctly. You were with Olivia Brooks the night before her husband was murdered. Lucas nodded. Yes, I was. I never denied that. Olivia and I were involved. We were having an affair. Rodriguez kept her tone neutral. Did Ethan know? Lucas exhaled, shaking his head. No. He had no idea. She told me she was unhappy, but she was not ready to leave him yet. The detectives exchanged a glance. Rodriguez tapped a folder on the table. Where were you on the night of May 3rd, between 11 and 1 in the morning? Lucas met her gaze without hesitation. I was at a photo shoot. You can check with the photographer. I was there the whole time. The detectives did exactly that. They contacted the photographer, who confirmed that Lucas had been present for the shoot. His alibi checked out. But then, something unusual surfaced. The photographer casually mentioned that, during the session, Lucas had stepped away to take a phone call. The call lasted several minutes, and when he returned, his demeanor had shifted slightly, more focused, more intense. Rodriguez and Chin knew that phone call could be the missing link. If it was connected to Ethan's murder, then Lucas was far from innocent. Detectives Rodriguez and Chin obtained warrants to examine the phone records of both Olivia Brooks and Lucas. As they sifted through the data, something immediately caught their attention: a series of cryptic messages exchanged between the two in the days leading up to Ethan's murder. One particular message from Lucas to Olivia stood out. I'll handle it. You'll be free soon. Rodriguez read the text aloud, her expression tightening. Free from what? Chin scrolled further, uncovering deleted messages that had been recovered using forensic software. These messages revealed a far more intimate relationship between Olivia and Lucas than they had initially let on. There were explicit exchanges, love declarations, and promises of a future together. Olivia had confided in Lucas about her unhappiness, and he had responded with assurances that the situation would be taken care of. But then, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Among Lucas's outgoing messages, detectives found that he had been sending Olivia's private photos to another number. The recipient was a man named Victor. Rodriguez frowned. Who the hell is Victor? Chin quickly traced the number through police databases. Within moments, the answer flashed across the screen. Victor was Ethan Brooks' secretary. The room fell silent for a beat. The discovery changed everything. Rodriguez exhaled sharply. Ethan's right-hand man was receiving explicit photos of his wife? Chin shook his head. This is not just an affair. This is something bigger. Wasting no time, the detectives had Victor brought in for questioning. They needed to know how deep his involvement went, and whether Ethan's murder had been part of something far more sinister than a simple crime of passion. Victor sat in the interrogation room, his fingers tapping nervously against the metal table. His demeanor was different from Lucas's. He was not confident. He was not composed. He was cornered. Detective Rodriguez placed a folder in front of him, flipping through pages of text messages, bank transactions, and call logs that painted a damning picture. She looked at him, her voice even. Let us start with the truth, Victor. Victor swallowed hard, his gaze shifting between Rodriguez and Chen. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke. I was blackmailing Olivia, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Chen leaned forward. With what? Victor hesitated, then sighed in defeat. The photos. The ones Lucas sent me. I told Olivia that if she did not pay me, I would send them to Ethan. Rodriguez's expression did not change. And what was your plan? Victor ran a hand through his hair. I figured I could milk them both, Olivia for money, Lucas for favors. I did not care about their affair. I just wanted leverage. Rodriguez tapped on the phone records. You and Lucas spoke on May 3rd. The night before Ethan died. You told him, time to initiate the plan. What plan, Victor? Victor looked away, his leg bouncing beneath the table. I told him it was time to scare Olivia. Push her harder to pay up. He exhaled sharply. I never thought Ethan would end up dead. That was not supposed to happen. The detectives exchanged a glance. If Victor had not intended for Ethan to die, that meant there was only one person left who could have committed the murder, Olivia Brooks. Detectives Rodriguez and Chin began piecing together Olivia Brooks's movements on May 4th, the morning her husband was found dead. They traced her route using CCTV footage, hoping to uncover what she had done in the hours before the crime was discovered. The first significant discovery came from a shopping mall surveillance camera. At 9:45 a.m., Olivia was seen walking into a department store. The receipt from her purchase listed cleaning supplies and heavy-duty trash bags, an odd combination for someone who was supposedly unaware of her husband's impending death. Another camera captured her return home. Instead of immediately going inside, she sat in her parked car for several minutes. The detectives reviewed the footage closely. She appeared tense, unmoving, as though gathering her thoughts. Then, after some time, she finally stepped out and entered the house. Later that morning, a new piece of footage emerged. At around 11 a.m., Olivia ran frantically out of her house, looking distressed. She jumped into her car and sped away. Rodriguez tapped her pen against the screen. What was she running from? Meanwhile, the autopsy results were in. One detail stood out, a lipstick mark on Ethan's cheek, which matched Olivia's signature shade, a unique blend sold at an exclusive boutique. However, something did not add up. Despite the visible signs of struggle, Ethan's fingernails contained no DNA traces. If he had fought back, why was there no evidence of it? Detectives then turned their attention to Olivia's car. A search of the vehicle revealed fabric fibers caught in the door handle. The material was sent to the lab for analysis. If it matched anything from the crime scene, it could be the final nail in Olivia's case. With mounting evidence and inconsistencies in her story, Olivia Brooks was brought back for another round of interrogation. This time, the detectives were not going to let her walk out so easily. Olivia Brooks sat in the interrogation room for the second time, her expression carefully guarded. But this time, detectives Rodriguez and Chin were prepared to break her down. Rodriguez placed a series of photographs in front of her, CCTV footage from the mall, forensic reports, the lipstick match, and the fibers found in her car. She pointed at each piece of evidence, speaking firmly. You lied about where you were. You bought cleaning supplies. You sat in your car, hesitating before going inside. Then, later, you ran out in a panic. Your lipstick was on Ethan's cheek, and yet, he has no DNA under his fingernails. We know you were there when he died, Olivia. We just need you to admit it. Olivia's breathing grew uneven. She swallowed hard, her composure beginning to crack. I never meant to kill him, she whispered. Rodriguez and Chin remained silent, letting her continue. Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she finally confessed. She admitted that Lucas had threatened to expose their affair to Ethan unless she complied with his demands. Panicked, she rushed home that night to delete any messages before Ethan could see them. But when she walked into the bedroom, Ethan was already on his phone. I thought he was looking at the pictures, she choked out. I tried to grab the phone, but he pushed me back. He was getting suspicious. I panicked. A struggle broke out. Olivia grabbed the belt from the nightstand and pulled it around Ethan's neck in desperation. She just wanted him to stop fighting her, to keep him from seeing the messages. But in the heat of the moment, she pressed too hard. When Ethan's body went limp, she realized too late what she had done. On May 6, 2018, Olivia Brooks was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began quickly, and the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, her digital trail, her purchases, the lack of forced entry, and her own confession. On May 15, 2018, Olivia was found guilty and sentenced to death. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's words echoed through the chamber. She was led away in handcuffs, her once glamorous life now reduced to a tragic downfall. News of Olivia Brooks's guilty verdict spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of public outrage and debate. Social media platforms were flooded with divided opinions. Some believed that Olivia had been a desperate woman manipulated by Lucas and blackmailed by Victor, while others saw her as a cold-blooded murderer who had taken her husband's life to protect her own secret. Many questioned whether her death sentence was justified, while others demanded swift execution, arguing that Ethan Brooke, a respected businessman and philanthropist, had lost his life in the most senseless and selfish way. Beyond the courtroom, Ethan's death left a deep void in the community. The charities he had once supported struggled to stay afloat without his generous contributions. His company, Brooke Technologies, faced leadership uncertainty, and some of his long-term projects came to a halt. The annual charity run he had founded to support underprivileged youth was now in jeopardy, and the local food bank, where he had been a major donor, worried about funding. Olivia Brooks's execution was scheduled for June 2, 2018. As the day arrived, the public watched, some with anger, others with sorrow. News outlets covered every moment, recounting her fall from grace, from a privileged wife of a millionaire to a convicted murderer facing the ultimate penalty. It was a tragic tale of greed, desperation, and deadly secrets, one that left a trail of ruined lives and a shattered legacy. In February 2022, in Crestwood, life appeared ideal for the Davis family. Sarah Davis was a dedicated mother of two and a traditional housewife. Her husband, Matt Davis, worked long hours as an accountant at a local firm. To outsiders, their marriage looked strong and admirable. However, beneath the surface, Sarah was living a secret life. Matt had no idea that Sarah was having multiple affairs. She craved excitement, something she felt was missing from their steady and predictable marriage. Over the years, these encounters became more frequent and riskier. She met her lovers in motels, at private parties, and even in their home when Matt was away on business trips. She was always cautious, covering her tracks, but the thrill of each new affair kept her going. On a cold February evening, Matt arrived home earlier than expected. He was feeling unwell due to the flu and wanted to surprise Sarah before getting some rest. He quietly unlocked the front door, careful not to wake the children if they were asleep. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed the house was unusually silent. The only sound was a faint rustling coming from their bedroom upstairs. With each step he took up the stairs, his heartbeat grew louder. Something felt off. The silence in the house carried a strange sense of unease. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw that the bedroom door was slightly open. A dim light spilled into the hallway. Slowly, he pushed the door open just enough to see inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sarah was in their bed with another man. The same bed they had shared for years. For a moment, Matt could not move. He stood frozen in the doorway, feeling as if the world had collapsed beneath him. His mind went blank as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Sarah was the first to see him. Her face turned pale, and she gasped. In a panic, she pushed the man away and tried to speak, but her voice shook with fear. Matt could see her lips moving, but he could not hear the words. It felt like he was outside his own body, watching everything from a distance, as if it were happening to someone else. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Sarah called out to him, but he did not stop. He had no idea where he was going. He only knew he needed to get out of the house. As he stepped into the cold night air, he kept walking, hoping to escape the images burned into his mind. But no matter how far he went, the scene played over and over again in his head. In the days that followed, Matt was lost in a blur of emotions. He could not sleep. He could not eat. All he could think about was Sarah's betrayal. His mind was filled with questions. He needed answers. When Sarah was not looking, he began searching through her phone, reading her emails, and looking into every part of her life that he could access. What he found was worse than he had imagined. Sarah had been living this secret life for years. There was not just one man. There were many. The affairs had been going on for much longer than Matt wanted to believe. Every piece of evidence he found felt like another wound. Every text message, every hidden email, and every secret meeting revealed a side of Sarah he had never known. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had built a life with, had been living a lie. Matt's discovery shattered him. The love he once felt for Sarah twisted into something dark. He could not stop thinking about her betrayal, not just with one man, but with several. The pain consumed him. Sleep was impossible. Food had no taste, and his thoughts became an endless loop of anger and resentment. One thought began to take over everything else: revenge. He could not simply move on. He could not let the men who had taken his life from him walk away without consequences. The more he thought about it, the more his anger grew. He wanted them to suffer, to feel the same pain that had taken over his life. On March 3, 2022, Matt decided it was time to act. He had learned the name of one of Sarah's lovers, a local instructor named Derek. For days, he had studied Derek's routine. He knew exactly where and when to find him. That evening, Matt parked his car near Derek's apartment. He waited in the darkness, his rage building with every passing moment. The street was quiet, the night cold and still. When Derek finally appeared, Matt's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Derek had no idea what was coming. He was just another man living his life, unaware of the storm about to hit him. As he approached the entrance to his building, Matt stepped out of the shadows. Derek looked up, surprised to see him. Before Derek could speak, Matt confronted him. His anger poured out as he demanded answers. He wanted to know every detail, every moment Derek had shared with Sarah. Derek was caught off guard. He was confused, defensive. But Matt was not listening. The confrontation quickly grew heated. When Derek tried to walk away, something inside Matt snapped. Without thinking, he grabbed the gym towel slung over Derek's shoulder. In one swift motion, he wrapped it around Derek's neck and pulled. The rage that had been boiling inside him exploded. Derek struggled, his hands clung at the towel, trying to break free. But Matt's grip only tightened. His pain, his anger, everything he had held inside for so long was being released in this one moment. Derek's movements grew weaker. His gasps turned into silence. Then, his body went limp. Matt stood there, breathing heavily. He looked down at Derek's lifeless form. The rage was gone, replaced by emptiness. He let go of the towel and stepped back. His mind raced. He had crossed a line, one he could never go back from. But instead of guilt, Matt felt something else. Power. Killing Derek had not satisfied him. If anything, it had only made the anger stronger. One was not enough. He needed to finish what he had started. Over the next week, Matt hunted down 2 more men. Both had been involved with Sarah. And both suffered the same fate. Each murder became more violent as Matt's rage deepened and his grip on reality faded. On March 6, 2022, a neighbor found Derek's body. The neighbor became concerned when Derek did not show up for his usual morning run. He knocked on Derek's door, but there was no response. When he found the door unlocked, he stepped inside and discovered the lifeless body. The police arrived quickly and examined the scene. There were few clues. Derek's apartment was neat, with no clear signs of a struggle. The only possible evidence was the towel Matt had used, but it carried no fingerprints. The detectives were puzzled. There was no motive, no suspect, and nothing to point them in the right direction. 2 days later, on March 8, 2022, another body was found. This time, it was a businessman murdered in a motel room. The motel staff found him after he failed to check out on time. His body was on the bed, showing clear signs of a violent attack. There were bruises, deep cuts, and clear evidence of a struggle. The police were called once again. This crime scene was different. Unlike Derek's apartment, there were signs of a fight. But just like before, there was no clear evidence to identify the killer. The police found some fibers and hair, but they were not enough to lead to a suspect. There were no witnesses, and the motel's security cameras were not working that night. The investigation was becoming more difficult. As detectives examined the cases, they noticed similarities. Both victims were men, and both were murdered within days of each other. This made them look deeper into their backgrounds. They searched for any possible connection between the two. What they found changed everything. Both men had been romantically involved with Sarah Davis. Derek had been seeing her for a few months, while the businessman had been involved with her for nearly a year. This discovery led detectives to focus on Sarah and her husband, Matt. Sarah was called in for questioning. She appeared shocked and upset when asked about the murders. She claimed to know nothing about why her past lovers had been targeted. She told detectives that she had ended her affairs and was trying to fix her marriage. Her story sounded believable, and with no evidence against her, the police had no reason to hold her. The detectives then turned their attention to Matt. When questioned, he appeared sad and distant, still struggling with the pain of Sarah's betrayal. His alibis for the nights of the murders checked out, and there was no direct evidence linking him to the crimes. The case had reached a dead end. The detectives had their suspicions, but with no concrete proof, they could not move forward. They continued to watch both Matt and Sarah, hoping for a break in the case, but nothing new emerged. Without witnesses or evidence, the investigation stalled. By mid-March, Matt was barely holding onto his sanity. The guilt, rage, and darkness that had taken over his life were now controlling him. He had already taken lives, yet it was not enough. His anger only grew stronger. But there was still one more man. This man was not just another fling. He was a wealthy real estate agent, someone who had been involved with Sarah for over a year. In Matt's eyes, this man was the real reason for his pain. One night, Matt decided it was time to finish what he had started. He followed the man through the city, his mind focused on what he was about to do. The man, completely unaware of the danger, drove to a quiet spot on the outskirts of town, a place he often visited to clear his thoughts. Matt watched from a distance, waiting for the right moment. His heart pounded, and his hands trembled, but he was determined. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the man stepped out of his car, Matt moved in. His footsteps felt heavy, weighed down by everything he had done. The darkness around them seemed to close in. He could hear his own breath, loud and uneven. He approached, his mind a storm of rage, fear, and despair. But just as he was about to attack, something inside him broke. The anger that had consumed him for weeks suddenly vanished, leaving behind only guilt and horror. The weight of his actions crashed down on him. Instead of striking, Matt dropped to his knees, his entire body shaking. His breath came in gasps as he spoke, the words pouring out in a desperate, frantic confession. He told the man everything. About Sarah's affairs. About Derek. About how he had lost control of his life. At first, the man was confused. Then, as the truth became clear, fear filled his eyes. He had no idea who Matt was or why he was telling him these things, but he could see the danger in his trembling hands and hear the madness in his voice. As Matt continued to ramble, the man slowly backed away. Then, in a sudden burst of panic, he turned and ran. His heart pounded as he rushed to his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his phone. He dialed the police and sped away. When officers arrived, they found Matt still there, sitting on the ground, covered in blood, mumbling to himself. He did not resist when they handcuffed him. He did not speak as they led him to the police car. The fire that had once driven him was gone, replaced by emptiness. But the case was far from over. As investigators searched the Owens home, they uncovered something shocking. Sarah had known about Matt's actions all along. Text messages between Sarah and one of her lovers revealed that she had been manipulating Matt, feeding his paranoia, and subtly encouraging his violent behavior. It became clear that she had been controlling him from the beginning, using his love and jealousy to get rid of the men she no longer wanted. Detectives quickly pieced together the timeline of Matt's descent into madness. On March 10, 2022, they brought Sarah in for questioning. At first, she played the role of the grieving wife, pretending to be horrified by Matt's actions. But as the evidence against her grew, her lies began to unravel. They found text messages where she had planted seeds of doubt in Matt's mind. "Matt, do you ever feel like people are laughing at you behind your back?" She made him question everything, stirring his insecurity. "I heard noises last night when you were gone. It scared me so much." These messages made him more paranoid and angrier. Then, in the attic, detectives found Sarah's diary. Inside, she had written about her affairs in detail, describing the excitement she felt living her secret life. But her words also revealed something darker, her growing hatred for Matt. "Matt is so boring," she wrote. "I wish he would just disappear." The most chilling entries, however, showed just how much she had planned everything. Sarah's diary revealed just how deeply she had planned everything. "If I push him just right, he will snap. He will get rid of my problems for me." When Matt was arrested, he was in shock. He could not believe what he had done, and even worse, he could not believe that Sarah had known all along. He had truly loved her, and realizing that she had used that love to turn him into a monster was unbearable. In the end, he confessed everything to the police, hoping for some kind of peace. On March 15, 2022, Matt was charged with 3 counts of murder. His defense attorney argued that Sarah's betrayal and manipulation had driven him to insanity. The court reviewed the evidence, the text messages, the diary, the phone records. The evidence against Sarah was overwhelming. But the prosecution, led by a sharp and determined district attorney, painted a different picture. They argued that Matt had allowed his jealousy to take control, leading him down a dark path of brutal killings. The trial began in early January 2023. Every day, the courtroom was packed. People from Crestwood and beyond came to watch the drama unfold. The media covered the case heavily, turning it into a national spectacle. The prosecution started strong. They presented Sarah's diary, which detailed her affairs, her manipulation, and her growing hatred for Matt. They also used forensic evidence to link Matt to each crime scene. Fingerprints, DNA, and other traces proved his presence. But the most shocking part was Sarah's role in everything. The prosecution revealed text messages between Sarah and her lovers. These messages showed how she had been manipulating Matt, pushing him toward violence. She had used his love and jealousy against him, knowing exactly how he would react. The evidence painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had used Matt as a pawn in her own twisted game. The most dramatic moment came when Matt took the stand. His testimony was emotional and heartbreaking. He spoke about his love for Sarah and how discovering her betrayal had shattered him. He described the moment he found out about the affairs, the rage that consumed him, and how he lost control. He broke down as he talked about his guilt over the murders. The courtroom was silent as everyone listened, captivated by his tragic story. Sarah's defense tried to portray her as a victim too. They claimed she had never directly asked Matt to kill anyone. They argued that she was just a lonely woman in a failing marriage, looking for excitement. But the evidence against her was too strong. The diary entries and text messages revealed a clear pattern of manipulation. Sarah's demeanor on the stand only made things worse. She showed little emotion. Her cold and calculating nature was on full display. The jury saw her for who she truly was. In the end, the verdict was clear. The jury found Matt guilty on all counts. They believed he had been manipulated, but he had still committed the murders. On April 25, 2023, Matt was sentenced to death. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Matt's family wept, but he stood motionless, broken and resigned. Sarah was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge stated that while she had not physically killed anyone, her actions had directly led to the deaths of 3 men. Sarah showed little emotion as she was led away. She maintained her cold, detached demeanor until the very end. As everything unfolded, one question remained: had Sarah turned Matt into a monster, or had he always been one? Some speculated that this might not have been Matt's first murder. His precision, his calmness, and his determination seemed too perfect for a novice. But then again, we are left wondering, could Matt have chosen a different path? Could he have handled his wife's betrayal without resorting to murder? If Sarah had not manipulated him, would he have stopped after the first killing? One police officer even remarked that it might have been better if Matt had confronted Sarah directly instead of taking the lives of men who were unaware of the depth of her deception. But now, it is too late. Matt is gone. No life sentence, only death. All because of a woman who knew exactly how to push him over the edge. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss any of our true crime stories. We have many cases of people whose obsessions led to their downfall. Be sure to check them out.
On June 12, 2010, that day would change everything for Grace Harrison. The sun was shining, and its light touched the Harrison home, a large and beautiful house outside Atlanta. From the outside, the house looked perfect. It showed the success of David Harrison, who worked as a top lawyer. The air was full of excitement as the family prepared for a big gathering. People in uniforms moved quickly between the kitchen and the garden. Tables were covered with clean cloths and colorful flowers. The swimming pool sparkled in the sunlight. Visitors were expected by noon. Everything needed to look just right. Grace had spent many weeks planning the event. Just like many other times, she wanted to make sure everything looked perfect. Every small detail was carefully checked. She always felt the need to show that her family was doing well. She woke up early that morning. Her head was full of tasks and reminders. She wore a simple but pretty dress with flowers on it. Grace was 39 years old. She had 2 teenage children, Emily and Alex. They were the most important part of her life. Grace had given up her dream of becoming an interior designer to help David grow in his career. She once believed they were building a beautiful life, a strong family, money to feel safe, and a bright future for their children. But that dream was broken. Inside the house, away from others, Grace was living in fear. David, who was 42, was not the same man at home as he was in public. Outside, people saw him as kind, friendly, and successful. He often went to charity events and spoke at big meetings. Many people liked him, but at home, he acted differently. He controlled everything. He would suddenly become angry, and Grace would become quiet and careful. He often shouted at her. Sometimes, he would even hurt her. The signs of those attacks were hidden by clothes or makeup. He used his money and power to control her. He always told her she was nothing without him. Grace stayed quiet because of many reasons. She had no money of her own. David always made her feel afraid. She worried about her children. So, she stayed silent. At 11:30 in the morning, the guests started to arrive. They were smiling and laughing. The big house felt full of happiness. Grace walked through the people, smiling even though it was not real. She welcomed relatives, old friends, and David's work partners. She spoke politely. Her voice did not shake, but her hands did. Her mother, a careful and wise woman in her 60s, noticed something was wrong. She saw small signs of sadness in Grace. Quietly, she took Grace to the side and asked if everything was okay. Grace gave a nervous laugh and said she was just tired from all the work. She tried to act normal. David, on the other hand, was enjoying the attention. He walked from group to group, telling funny stories and talking about his recent wins in court. At one point, he pointed to Grace and called her the strong support of the family. The people clapped, but Grace felt sick inside. She had heard these fake words before. David used such compliments to hide the truth about their life. He always cared about what others thought. That day was no different. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the feeling in the air changed. Grace saw David leaving the main area of the gathering. She felt nervous and followed him quietly. Her heart was beating fast. She watched as he entered the guest house at the edge of their land. It was a small but fancy place often used by family or friends when they stayed over. A few moments later, a woman named Samantha Boyd came into view. Grace stayed hidden behind a garden hedge and watched as Samantha looked around quickly and then went into the guest house. Grace stood still. Samantha Boyd was 28 years old. She was smart, good-looking, and worked hard. 2 years ago, she had joined David's law firm as a junior worker. She had a strong personality, but deep down, she also had fears. She grew up in a simple home and looked up to David. What began as a professional connection turned into something more. At first, it was late-night meetings they said were about work. Then came expensive dinners that David called business. Slowly, their relationship became closer and more personal. As Grace stood outside the guest house, everything became clear. She could not hear what they were saying, but their actions said enough. Samantha looked upset. She was waving her hands, as if she was begging David. David, in contrast, looked calm. He even looked proud. He gently touched Samantha's shoulder, and Grace felt her chest tighten. She had seen that same look on David's face before, the proud and controlling look he showed during their fights. It was the same look he had before he would say the cruelest things. Grace began to remember the changes she had seen in David. Over the past year, he had started hiding things. He stayed late at work more often and gave weak reasons for being away. She had seen strange charges on their credit cards, expensive things she never got, fancy meals she never ate, and hotel bills she knew nothing about. Now, everything made sense. At 2:30 p.m., Grace went back to the party. She moved like a machine, handing out drinks and trying to smile. The voices around her were loud, but she barely heard them. Her mother came up to her again, now more serious. But Grace pulled away. She could not speak. She felt like she could not breathe. She had just seen her life fall apart, and she knew. David's power and money could destroy her if she tried to fight back. If she made a quick decision without thinking, things could go very wrong. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, David and Samantha returned to the party. They acted normal, as if nothing had happened. But Grace could not forget what she had just seen. When David raised his glass to give a toast about family and love, Grace held the edge of the tablecloth tightly. Her hands turned pale from the pressure. The guests clapped loudly, but Grace felt none of their joy. She felt anger, fear, and something new. Strength as the afternoon continued, David became more bold. He stood closer to Samantha. His hand rested on her back longer than it should have. Grace saw how uncomfortable Samantha looked. She did not meet anyone's eyes and kept drinking from her glass nervously. By 4 p.m., Grace was barely able to keep her calm. Her mind was spinning with thoughts. How long had this secret relationship been happening? How could David act like this in front of everyone? Most of all, how could she keep herself and her children safe from what might happen next? The guests had no idea that the perfect image of the Harrison family was starting to fall apart. The reunion, meant to bring people together, had become a place full of secrets, lies, and growing pressure. For the first time in many years, Grace felt something rising inside her. She felt brave. She did not yet know what she would do or when, but she made a quiet promise to herself. David's control over her would not continue. June 12, 2010 would not just be another day she stayed silent. It would be the day she started to take back her life. The garden, full of green trees and clean white chairs, was now the center of attention. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the Harrison home. David stood in front of everyone with his glass raised. The crowd, made up of relatives, friends, and business people, gathered around him for what they believed would be a happy moment. Everyone was smiling and talking, but a storm was building inside Grace. Grace stood at the back of the group. She held a folder close to her chest. Her hands shook. Her heart beat so hard that she felt like others might hear it. The past few hours had been filled with too many emotions: anger, sadness, fear, and a strong decision to escape. Everything she had suffered through had brought her to this point. David's cheating, along with the pain he had caused for years, was now too heavy to carry. She looked at the folder in her hands. It felt like her only protection. It was her proof, her defense, and her hope. It gave her the courage she needed. David began his toast. His voice was full of confidence. He spoke about love, family, and strong relationships. The crowd smiled and nodded, not knowing that his words were full of lies. Grace looked at Samantha, who sat near the front. Samantha avoided her eyes. Her body was stiff, and her face looked pale. Even though the weather was warm, Grace's decision became stronger. She could not let David's false words control her story any longer. Using all the courage she had left, she walked forward, at first. Her voice was soft. People kept talking, not noticing her. But slowly, the sound around her faded. One by one, people stopped and turned. Eyes widened. The air felt heavy. Grace did not look at David. As she spoke, she could not bring herself to look at David. Instead, she kept her eyes on the crowd, the same people who had always admired David for his charm and success. She began to tell them about the years of pain she had gone through. She described the harsh words, the threats, the nights she spent hiding bruises, and the quiet tears she shed where only her children, Emily and Alex, might have seen. The words came out of her like a flood, raw and full of pain. It was as if something deep inside her had finally broken open. The guests stood silent, their faces filled with shock, disbelief, and sympathy. As Grace continued, she opened the folder in her hands. Slowly, she held up the evidence she had spent many hours collecting. There were bank statements that showed David had spent large amounts of money on Samantha. There were receipts for jewelry, luxury vacations, and even rent for a fancy apartment. In the city, Grace's hands shook as she showed everyone the truth, proof that David had broken the trust in their marriage. The pain of that betrayal was clear for everyone to see. Gasps rose from the crowd when Grace turned and pointed at Samantha. The young woman, trying to hide in her seat, froze. Her face turned red, and she nervously grabbed her purse like she was trying to leave. Some guests began whispering in anger. Where they had once looked at Samantha with respect, now their eyes showed judgment and disappointment. One of David's cousins, a strong woman who had always stood by Grace, stepped forward and blocked Samantha's path. Others followed, raising their voices and demanding the truth. The mood shifted quickly. Then David, who had stayed quiet at first, reacted. His calm disappeared. He stormed toward Grace with the same anger she had seen many times before. His face was tight with rage. Grace's heart stopped for a moment as David grabbed her arm. His grip was strong and full of fury. Time felt like it had frozen. All the fear she had kept inside for so many years came crashing down in that one moment. But then something happened that no one expected. Emily, standing near the edge of the crowd, ran forward. Her teenage voice, full of fear but also courage, rang out above the noise. She stood between her parents, her small body shaking but firm. Guests moved fast to help. They pulled David away from Grace and formed a wall between him and the rest of the family. David tried to take control again. He yelled at the guests, trying to silence them, but no one listened. His power over them was gone. Their silence had turned into anger. By 8 p.m., the garden was empty. The laughter and music were replaced by quiet whispers as people picked up their things and left. Grace stood on the porch with Emily and Alex. Emily held tightly onto her mother, crying and trying to comfort her. Alex did not speak, but he stayed close. His quiet presence was his way of showing he was there for her. Grace felt too strong. Emotions at the same time, relief and fear. Relief that the truth was finally out. Fear of what David might do next. The next morning, June 13, 2010, Grace went to the local police station. Her hands trembled as she handed over everything she had. There were photographs of bruises, medical reports, and a written statement that explained what she had suffered. The officers listened carefully. With each piece of evidence, their expressions became more serious. There was no question. Something had to be done. Later that day, David was arrested at his office. His co-workers, who had always looked up to him, watched in silence as he was taken away in handcuffs. He shouted loudly, denying everything, but no one believed him. His carefully built image was falling apart. By June 15, 2010, Grace had filed for divorce. Her story spread quickly. The town's newspapers shared every detail. People who had once feared David's power now saw the truth. His money and position, which once protected him, were now used to uncover the lies. His bank records were examined closely. They showed not only the cheating, but also how he had tried to hide money and keep Grace from having access to their shared accounts. The damage reached beyond just their family. On June 20, 2010, Samantha left the law firm. The public judgment and the constant attention became too much for her. She released a carefully written message saying she did not know about David's violent behavior. But the proof told a different story. Messages between her and David showed that she knew about Grace's pain but chose to stay silent. The image of the Harrison family, once seen as perfect, was now broken beyond repair. Grace, though still shaken, started to feel something new. After many painful years, she was no longer just trying to survive. She was starting to take her life back, one small step at a time. When the trial started on July 10, 2010, the air inside the courtroom felt heavy. Grace sat at the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a simple black dress. Her face was pale but strong. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She was ready to face the man who had hurt her for so long. David sat only a few feet away. His face showed no emotion, but his tight jaw showed how hard he was trying to stay in control. He wore an expensive suit and looked carefully prepared. But in that courtroom, it no longer mattered. His darkest secrets were about to be revealed. The courtroom was full. Reporters, family, and strangers filled every seat. The story of the rich lawyer who had been hiding a violent truth caught the attention of many. But more than that, people were drawn to Grace's strength. To them, she became a symbol of courage. For Grace, this was not just about justice. It was about getting her life back. It was about protecting her children. The trial began with the prosecutor sharing a clear and painful picture of Grace's life. Her words were filled with truth. She spoke about the fear, the locked doors, the bruises, and the way David's anger had always been a threat. The courtroom was silent as she spoke. Some moments were so emotional that her voice broke, but she kept going. She wanted every truth to be heard. Strong evidence was shown to support her words. Photos of her injuries and medical papers were shown to the court. Financial records proved David had spent large amounts of money on Samantha. There were also messages David had sent Grace, filled with threats and insults. These clearly showed his cruelty. Several witnesses spoke in support of Grace. Neighbors told the court how they had heard loud fights. One woman, a retired teacher, said she once saw Grace crying alone in her car, too scared to go back into the house. Their housekeeper also spoke. She shared that she had seen broken furniture and had heard fights. She also revealed that David once warned her to keep quiet or lose her job. David's lawyers tried hard to defend him. They said Grace was not stable. They said she was trying to get sympathy and money. They pointed out that she never had a full career, suggesting she was just bitter and greedy. But their words did not hold up. The proof was too strong. The photos, messages, and witness stories gave a clear picture. David's lies were falling apart. During the trial, David stayed cold and distant. He barely looked at Grace. He only spoke when needed, and his words were dry and practiced. He tried to act like the victim, blaming Grace. But slowly, even his calm mask started to slip. Each time the truth was shown, his face tightened slightly, showing signs of stress. Everything changed when Emily Harrison stood to speak. Betty, only 16 years old, Emily walked to the stand. Her voice was shaking, but her voice, though shaky, remained steady. She spoke about the nights when she and her younger brother Alex would hide in their rooms, listening to their parents argue. She described the fear she felt when she saw her mother with bruises, crying quietly. She explained how helpless she had felt, too young to do anything to stop it. Her words were full of pain and left the entire courtroom in silence. It became clear that David's actions had not only hurt Grace, they had left deep scars on the children as well. By July 25, 2010, the trial had come to an end. The jury took several hours to reach a decision, but for Grace, every minute felt endless. When the jury returned, their decision was clear and united. David Harrison was found guilty of domestic violence and financial fraud. The judge gave his sentence without hesitation, 5 years in prison and a large amount of money to be paid to Grace. For the first time since the trial began, David's emotionless face changed. There was a small moment of disbelief, then anger. But for Grace, the decision brought mixed feelings. She had received justice, but the pain from the past could not be erased. Still, it was also a moment of freedom. She had faced the man who had once controlled her life, and she had won. She walked out of the courtroom with Emily and Alex holding her hands. She felt something lift from her shoulders. For the first time in many years, she felt free. In the weeks that followed, Grace began to rebuild. The court gave her full custody of her children and ownership of their home. She used the money awarded to her to create something meaningful. She started a foundation to help others who had suffered like she had. She called it Grace's Haven. It became a safe space for women who had lived in fear and silence. Through her own story, she gave others strength. She offered hope and support to women looking for a way out of abuse. The trial and everything that came after it changed many lives. David, once respected as a lawyer, began his prison sentence with his career in ruins. Samantha Boyd disappeared from public life. Her job and reputation were lost because of her role in the scandal. But Grace, at last, could look forward to a better future. The road had been painful, but she had come out stronger. She was ready to create a new life for herself and her children. This story was powerful, but it is not the only one. There is another case just like it, where a wife exposed her husband's secret relationship with her boss during a family event, and it ended in tragedy. Be sure to watch that story next, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more real-life updates every day.